Hey, Chad. How's it going? Which way do we go to get to picture this? Which way? Do we go that way? Hello, everyone. For anyone on podcast who isn't watching, Chad is doing a full Scarecrow from Wizard of Oz routine here, and Chad has fallen out of the frame. Welcome, everyone, to Picture This, or as we like to call it for this first minute, Frame Wreck, because Chad just wrecked the frame and fell out of it. But we'll hopefully recover him soon, shortly. He's still off the screen. There he is. Ah! Trick or treat. Happy Halloween. I was getting concerned for a sec that your camera froze. I was like, uh-oh, do I have to restart this? How's it going, Chad? Welcome to Picture This.
I'm sorry, Dylan. I guess I forgot how to think there for a second.
It's okay. No, I I'm just thinking about all the podcast listeners who are like, why are they? What's happening? Because you're just dancing
That's
around.
a good point.
And no one can see I'm fully silver. I'm Mr. Tin Man today, and Chad is fully decked out in the Scarecrow. But
So,
Chad, we can't do it by ourselves, right?
correct.
Yeah. So we need someone else to guide us down this yellow brick road, right?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Well, why don't you introduce the guest today for our Halloween special Picture This 1940, Chad?
Oh, Dorothy! Dorothy!
There she is.
Here
Hello,
I
Kerri.
am.
Welcome back to Picture This. I'll put you at the top since you are the first one down the yellow brick road, so people can see your name as well. But welcome back to Picture This. I believe now you are either tied with Dan or have taken the lead for the most guest appearances here on our show, which is so exciting. Happy Halloween, guys. How you doing, Kerri?
I'm doing great, thanks. Yeah, I think this is my third time on the show, so thank you for having me.
Nice. Well, we're always happy to have you. And as people can see, we are the Wizard of Oz characters. We're not covering the Wizard of Oz here. That was 39. We'd already covered it, but the 39 movies competed in the Oscars in 1940. So we're like, this works, you know? And I know Chad and Kerri and their little one were doing a little Wizard of Oz theme, and they didn't have a Tin Man. So I was like, you know what? Why not? Why not be the heartless one here and come on and paint myself silver for the show? So welcome everyone to Picture This, a Best Picture marathon through every Best Picture nominee in the history of the Oscars. Today we're covering 10 nominees, and it's spooky season. So Chad, Kerri, and I have been watching a lot of things this month. Chad and Kerri will talk a little bit more about it, but like they've been watching a ton of horror movies for their own channel, their own shows. I've been watching a horror movie a day or a spooky season movie a day, and then we have 10 of these on top of it, and I decided to be a little proactive and watch these a month ago, but because I watched these a month ago, they are fading from my memory like the heart faded from the Tin Man's chest at the start of that movie. So I'm gonna have to rely on these two for a little bit of support here, and I'm gonna hopefully try my best to catch up and converse as best I can, because 10 movies is a lot. It's already hard to juggle as is, let alone I watching this a month ago, let alone Chad and Kerri watching this amongst all their spooky season movies. So this might be a little more casual episode of Picture This, but we're always here to have a good time and talk about some fun movies. Chad, were you a fan of this slate here in 1940?
Yeah, I think like most of all, I am.
Mm.
I feel like there's a few that I just really had to think about and ended up really like figuring out that I love them.
Mm.
And then there's a few that I was just like not really a big fan of, but could see maybe like during the time why they were nominated, but maybe they don't hold up as well to today's standard. But I did want to say also, yeah, happy Halloween. And yeah, back when we did the Wizard of Oz episode of Picture This, we were thinking about dressing up and then we decided against it ultimately. And I always thought, like, what if we did it? And so, we were like, it's so close. Why not?
Yeah.
And then I applaud Dylan for putting his together last minute, but it looks so good. Like, he's so creative.
Well, because I was like, I'll dress up. Yeah, it's easy. Tin Man. I just, silver makeup and some aluminum foil. And I was like, how the hell do I make a cone head out of aluminum foil? And that took quite a while to figure out. Help from my sister Nina, who helped me with it, and my mom,
Aw.
who helped me with the makeup. So I did not do this all by myself. I promise. I'm not taking that credit. Kerri, what did you think of this slate in general? I know I haven't listed off the titles yet, but just in general, this slate. How do you feel about it?
I really like the slate. I gave half of the movies 5 stars on Letterboxd. I am an easy 5 stars, I will say. Like, if I
Easy to
really
please.
enjoy it, I will give it 5 stars. So it is a little skewed for me. But yeah, like my top three, like they could on different days could be number ones for the slate. So overall, and I think all of them were entertaining. I don't think there was like a truly bad movie in this bunch. I
Yeah.
just had a few that I didn't like as much.
Yeah, I definitely think the highs are really high for this year. Like, I think there are some all timers in the list. Sorry, I had to burp. I just ate dinner before this too. But yeah, like I think it's gonna be a really interesting conversation because I think the ones that are a little less known might be some of the more fun discussions because no one really has like a big opinion on them, which is fun. And a lot of these slate, 6 films are directed by 3 people because there are 3 directors that have 2
Yeah.
films in the slate.
Mhm.
So I think that also adds something fun because now we can not only compare these films to other films in the slate, but we can also compare them with the other films that those directors had in the slate, which I think adds just a little extra sizzle to it. But people out there are probably asking, what are the movies, Dill? Because, you know, the thumbnail is crowded with 10 movies. So I'm going to help you out right now. The 10 films nominated for the Oscars in 1940 for the 1941 ceremony are All This and Heaven 2. Heaven TOO, not like a sequel to the first film, like it's Heaven 2 also. A Foreign Correspondent, The Grapes of a Wrath, The Great Dictator, Kitty Foyle, The Letter, The Long Voyage Home, Our Town, The Philadelphia Story, and the Best Picture winner, which will be last today, is Rebecca. So there you go. Shout out, Mom. My mom's name is Rebecca. But yeah, there are some spooky-ish movies or dark films in this slate, thrillers and stuff. So it felt like a good Halloween episode. I mean, the king of suspense, the master. What do they call him? The
Master of
father of
Suspense.
master of suspense. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
He had
Good
2
job.
movies for best picture, and one of them won. So this was like a perfect way to kind of make it into a Halloween episode, even though there are some movies that aren't really spooky, but will still be fun to talk about.
Were the other two John Ford and Sam Wood?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, Sam Wood did Kitty Foyle and Our Town, and then John Ford did Long Voyage Home and
Great
Grapes of
Dictator.
Wrath. So 6 movies by 3 directors, and then there's some other guys in the mix too, including Charlie Chaplin and Betty Davis has a few films in there. So like really, really stacked in terms of like iconic Hollywood presences of the time. But it is also right before the war, so I'm sure we have a lot of good history to get into to paint this year for Chad. Why don't you tell us what was going on in the year of 1940?
All right. Yes, I don't have a ton here. It was mostly a lot of World War II stuff was going on, which is why some of these films, especially one, is very very interesting to
Mm,
talk about because we're in the heart of World War II at this
mm.
point in time.
Heart, what's that?
Um, oh, you wouldn't know, I guess, right?
Yeah, I always wanted one.
You'll get one, I'm sure. The first Hollywood anti-Nazi comedy film called "You Nazi Spy," starring the Three Stooges, is released, which predated one of the films that we're going to discuss today. The radioactive isotope carbon-14 is discovered. Pakistan calls for greater autonomy in British India. Booker T. Washington becomes the first African American to be depicted on a U.S. postage stamp. FDR creates the first peacetime draft in U.S. history. That's Franklin Delano Roosevelt, if you didn't know. Germany, Italy, and Japan sign a pact. Not a very nice one. Disney's Fantasia has its premiere on Broadway. Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None is published in book form, and Carrie and I were actually in that play.
Ooh.
Abbott and Costello make their film debut in One Night in the Tropics. Woody Woodpecker makes his debut in the animated short Knock Knock. The first appearance of Captain America and Bucky occurs in the comics. FDR says the U.S. must become the great arsenal of democracy. And then, yeah, just more and more World War II stuff. I figured I could list out all that stuff, but I think we kind of know what was going
Yeah,
on. And
yeah,
it's
yeah.
another
Very
show.
early on. Just out of curiosity, do you remember which parts you played in, and then there were none, or no?
I played like the old man.
I think
Gotcha.
I played the old lady. I think we were
Gotcha.
married in the
Nice.
We
Oh, fun.
were?
Yeah, I
No.
remember reading that book.
maybe I was a maid. I don't
Yeah,
know.
in elementary school. Yeah, I have a very distinct memory of that book, and I remember liking that book. I know that's aged, some elements are aged poorly, but it's I love Agatha Christie, fun murder mysteries and all that stuff. So just very cool, very cool. We'll be talking about some plays later on today in this slate. But Chad, any births, any deaths, any albums, any of
Yeah.
those? 40?
Yeah, well, I got some births. I got Pele, John Lennon, Bruce Lee, Michael Gambon, Chuck Norris, Ringo Starr, Tom Jones, Al Pacino, Alex Trebek, Nancy Pelosi, Patrick Stewart, Dionne Warwick, Smokey Robinson, Nancy Sinatra, John Lewis, James Caan, Raquel Welch, Richard Pryor, John Hurt, Martin Sheen, Frank Zappa, Paul Williams, Anthony Fauci, Raul Julia, James Brolin, James Cromwell, and Brian De Palma. And then just 4 deaths. I have F. Scott Fitzgerald,
Mm,
Neville Chamberlain, Marcus Garvey, and Walter Chrysler.
wow, is a name of the Chrysler Building named after him? Is that Walter Chrysler?
Potentially, I think it's the
Maybe.
car guy.
I
It
got
might
you,
be
got
the
you.
same guy.
I don't know, maybe. Cool. Any albums to note, Chad, in 1940?
Yeah. 10 as usual. I have Dust Bowl Ballads Volume 1 by Woody Guthrie, and then also Volume 2 by Woody Guthrie. Empress of the Blues by Bessie Smith. King Louis, or Louis, I guess, by Louis Armstrong. Arnold Schoenberg, Pierrot Lunaire by Arnold Schoenberg, Erica Steedry Wagner, Stefan I'm not going to read all these names. Sorry. Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto Number 2 in C minor by Leopold Stokowski, Philadelphia Orchestra, and Sergei Rachmaninoff. Marlene Dietrich by Marlene Dietrich. Blues on the Parade by Woody Herman and his orchestra. Stravinsky. I'm not going to do the French, but I'll say it's The Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky, the Philharmonic Symphony Orchestra of New York, and then lastly, The Chain Gang by Joshua White and his Carolinians.
Nice. Good on you for powering through that, Chad. It's very
Woo!
tough. Yeah, Rachmaninoff is the name you're trying to get, but you made it through. So the actual 1941 Oscars, nothing crazy happens. No like crazy. I usually start with the films that missed the cut, but I'm just gonna skip to the Oscars right now, just because there's really not a lot to say. It's more like historic nomination firsts. So Pinocchio, first animated film to win a competitive Oscar that year, which is very cool for Disney. Also, Thief of Baghdad wins 3 Oscars, making it the first time a film not nominated for Best Picture won the most amount of awards. You would have thought it would have gotten nominated. What I mentioned earlier with the directors, the pair of 3 directors, or the director with 3 pairs of films getting nominated, was really cool. And this is the first year of the Best Original Screenplay category. It used to just be Best Screenplay. Now they separated it to make it original and adapted. The adapted they just called Screenplay, and this was Best Original Screenplay. So they split those up then, which was fun. But I just want to get the Oscars quick because there's not anything really that much to note there. But there are some films that didn't make the cut, sadly, that we have to tip our caps or our tin hats to here. So, Kerri, you are our guest. Are there any 1940 films that you feel missed the cut that should have made it in?
That's a good question. Why don't you guys go first? Because I
Chad,
forgot this was a part of the show.
no worries, no worries. I always like to give it to the guest first, but Chad, why don't you tell us some notable films?
I know there are some, and there's actually some Carrie has seen recently. So I'll go through it. Black Friday. Here you go, Carrie. The Devil Bat. Fantasia, as I mentioned earlier, and then also Carrie, The Ghost Breakers. We watched 2 of those recently for our 61 Days of Primetime over at Welcome to Primetime. Check it out. His Girl Friday, The Mark of Zorro, Pride and Prejudice, not the Keira Knightley ones, too early for that. The Shop Around the Corner, which would then become You've Got Mail at some point. Swiss Family Robinson, and then the best picture worthy one I have that I've seen is Pinocchio.
Yeah, little puppet, a little puppet that could. I can relate as a man made of tin to the little man made of wood. Yeah, a very endearing little fellow there. Yeah, Pinocchio and Fantasia, literally 2 of Disney's biggest movies of all time.
Yeah.
Obviously, we see Sorcerer Mickey as like an iconic emblem of Disney. Pinocchio being such an iconic just film in general, but that song is literally what plays before every single Disney movie now ever, When You Wish Upon a Star. So two very influential films. The only other one I wanted to add to that, I also had His Girl Friday and Shop Around the Corner, but also the Broadway Melody of 1940 has the greatest tap dancing sequence of all time, even better than Singing in the Rain, and I love Singing in the Rain, but it is like the single greatest tap dance sequence of all time. So if you want to see the best tap dancing in film, Broadway Melody of 1940 is where it's at. Kerri, anything else to add to that? Any of those that Chad rattled off you would also include?
Yeah, I would definitely include like Fantasia and Pinocchio, and maybe even The Shop Around the Corner.
Yeah,
there
classic.
we go. Great. We don't have any precursors to talk about because the Golden Globes didn't exist for another 3 years. The Critics' Choice and BAFTAs and Producers Guild wouldn't be eligible for a while, so we can kind of jump right into the awards themselves. Why don't we? Why don't we jump into all this, and Heaven 2? Chad, tell us about All This, and Heaven 2.
Sure. All This and Heaven 2, the sequel. Psych. Directed by Anatoly Litvak, written by Casey Robinson, cinematography by Ernie Haller ASC, music by Max Steiner, starring Betty Davis, Charles Boyer, Jeffrey Lynn, Barbara O'Neill, Virginia Weidler, Helen Wesley, Walter Hampton, Henry Daniel, and Harry Davenport. Synopsis. A French governess falls in love with a French nobleman, adding to the turmoil of his relationship with his wife, leading to tragic events. Based on All This in Heaven 2 by Rachel Field.
There you go. We're in the midst of Betty Davis's big, emergence as the greatest star of that era. So we have two of her films to talk about, this being one of them. Kerri, as our guest, I'll turn it over to you first as well, again, for this one. What'd you think of All This in Heaven 2?
This one was okay. It was definitely not my favorite.
Okay.
It was an interesting story. It's like a love story, kind of a forbidden love. A man hires Betty Davis. I say a man. It's Charles Boyer.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
who's famous, and I know he has
Gaslight.
been part of other Picture This episodes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He and his wife hire, I guess, kind of a nanny for their children, an educator, a teacher, who is Betty Davis, and then they start, a relationship. Are we going into plot stuff, or should I just keep it to?
Yeah, we can. I mean, at this point, these movies are 80 years old. I'm like, if people really are getting upset that All This in Heaven 2 is being spoiled, then take a break, go watch it, and come back. I think it's at that point where we can talk openly about it.
Well, I won't spoil it, but they kind of Betty Davis and Charles Boyer, kind of fall in love with each other. The wife is painted as like this really horrible person. And things pursue. It's very melodramatic. I don't know. This one it gave me a little bit of an off, maybe because it was so melodramatic. It just kind of rubbed me the wrong way, a little bit. Just how wonderful Betty Davis is painted, and the wife is kind of purely villainized. Oh my God. I'm sorry. I'm dying.
Oh, you're good.
I don't know. I guess it kind of for me lacked a little bit of complexity to all of the characters. You guys go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add because Kerri was talking about the melodrama of the piece, and there's other melodramatic I feel like works that we're going to talk about the rest of this show that actually do it really well, and I feel like this one you can see that like Kerri I think hit it on the nose, or she's talking about the complexity. It's very simple, and not a lot happens. There is a very big thing that happens towards the end that Kerri was alluding to, and I'll just go ahead and say it because we always spoil stuff on here really is that the wife wants to hates the new woman that's coming in to help with the kids, but it's really just because of their whole toxic marriage and everything like that. But it leads to this boiling point where he ends up killing his wife, and then it leads into a whole kind of court case of like, now he can't reveal his love for this woman because, he'll go ahead and, be, she'll be implicated, and, he doesn't want either of them to be implicated, but knows that they can't like live like a life together, and stuff. And it's kind of sad because, that on one hand, that they probably would make like a cute little family because she does get along really well with those kids, and even like saves the littlest boy. And but like it can never be, like Harry said, like a forbidden romance. And then also you're upset because of the toxic relationship between these two people. It's not like that either of them are really bad people, it's just they're not right for each other. And yet it just really, it was very long. It's like 2.5 hours long, and I just feel like because it didn't really have like that much complexity to the characters, like Harry said, it was overly long for what it was, and I don't think it was like that enjoyable to watch. Although, as I think Carrie said, none of these are really like bad movies per se, but like I don't think this one is a very great one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. I think a lot of the highs, as I said earlier, are so high that like a lot of the other films that aren't as good do feel probably worse in comparison. But in actuality, like these would be like 3 or 4 on the rankings of like normal 5-year slates. But because we have a year of 10, a lot of these like kind of mid to low tier films are going to end up kind of just coming across worse than they actually are, because I actually think this movie, I actually really enjoy this one. I think it's got a really great Betty Davis performance at the center of it, but I also really like the framing device of it, because it is a long story, but it does feel like they are justifying it in the gravity of the framing device. Obviously, she's like a school teacher, I believe, and all her kids are basically like not giving her the time of day because she's this scandalous person. She's in the news. She's got like all this like dirt on her, and I like how it kind of presents us with that first, so we can genuinely be asking ourselves, is this like a woman who's done bad things, or is she being treated wrong? And I love how they don't give us the answer first. They let us see the end of it, and then they take us back through it, and then we can see that she did mean well. She did care for these kids, she did love these kids, but also understanding why she is persona non grata depending on how this whole situation ended up. I think it's a really cool framing device, which I think if it was just played out linearly would not be as engaging, because if you would just played the story out normally and ended with the scene where all the kids are like, you're a criminal, you're a criminal, she's like, here, let me tell you my story, it's not as impactful. But I think because you have that air of mystery, I was at least leaning in, because I was wondering, okay, I know where this is probably going to end up. I know this wife is going to die, because they also make her very Disney villainish. They make her almost like this cartoonish Cruella de Vil, Lady Tremaine like figure, which I think is one of the film's downfalls, because I think giving her a little bit more empathy would have helped kind of make it a bit bigger conflict. But because she's so nasty and awful to her kids and her husband, like, we know where it's going. We know that she's probably going to end up being killed. It's just a question of, does Betty Davis do it? Because we've seen her play in other films that she could be very dark and a murderer. So like, it's not off the table. But also it could be Charles Boyer, or it could be just something else that happens. And ultimately we find out it is Charles Boyer who does it. But I like how there was always that constant mystery of like, how does this story end to where she gets to the place she gets to at the beginning of the film? And that's what kept me engrossed. I do agree it is a little long, and I think because of the melodrama, it does feel its length at times. But I did always find that like every time a new scene would start, I'm like, okay, where is this building to? Because now I know where it ends up, which I think is what intrigued me to it. And I do think the fact that you get this beautiful story with her and the kids, because they really show that tenderness and love. It's kind of like the Sound of Music thing, like where you want her to be part of this family, and it engrosses you in it even more. It's not just because she loves this guy, she loves the family. And I think that's what makes it even more dramatic and sad and hard, but also harder to watch, because it is like very hard to watch, especially when she has to say goodbye to the kids. It's like, whoo, I was crying. I was devastated. I was like, this sucks, because you've built that relationship because it's so long, because you've had time to marinate and actually like develop these bonds further. So that's where I'm coming from. I did really enjoy it because of that, because I was engrossed in the characters and the relationships, and not just for the love story, but for the family dynamic at large. Though I do wish Barbara O'Neill's character were a little less one note Disney villain, because I do think if you give her a little bit more humanity and actually understand, like, this is difficult for me, like, this woman is now in my house, like, this is a difficult situation, rather than like, I'm gonna be evil and nasty. Like, it's like, okay, like it makes it a lot easier for the audience to be very one-sided and lack that depth that I feel like this film might need at times because it is so long, like you said. So, but I definitely see where you're coming from. It is long, it is melodramatic, and I think if that's not necessarily your style, if you're more into something a little bit faster paced or more energetic, more funny, this might not be your thing. Also, because Betty Davis's films go there, and this one doesn't feel like it always does. In terms of like All About Eve and Dark Victory, these other films we
Yeah.
watched of hers, and one we'll watch even later where it does go really dark.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a good point, and I do think like ultimately, it is an enjoyable watch, for the relationships with her and the kids, and stuff like that. And like you said, it does build into like you really want to see, maybe a good ending of them together or something like that. And it doesn't really go that way. But yeah, like, I think we're all kind of hitting on the idea of there's a little bit of complexity missing somewhere. And I think Dylan like hit it like where he's like, with like that not main woman, but like the
Barbara
wife.
O'Neill.
Yeah, Barbara O'Neill. So it is what it is. It's a good movie. It's just maybe not going to rank very highly for at least two of us.
That's fair. What did you all think about the Hallows Eve section? I kind of hyped it up a little too much, I think, beforehand. I was like, "Oh, there's a scene that takes place on Halloween." But I know it's very brief. But any thoughts on that?
I
Since we are on the Halloween topic, but
I'm actually not really remembering it, to be
okay,
honest.
gotcha.
Uh,
Yeah, Carrie, do you remember it?
Was there like a scary story told?
Something like that, yeah, like they're in the woods and it's like the night of Halloween, and it's a very brief scene. And I remember when I was watching it, I immediately texted y'all. I was
oh,
like, "Oh, this takes place on Halloween." I do think I probably oversold it because, yeah, I think that's the thing with this film. It's long, but the scenes do feel quick, like a lot of the little vignettes. But I just wasn't sure, just because it is a Halloween episode, I figured I'd
Yeah.
touch on it. Cool. Anything else? I mean, I know this is a brief conversation, but we do have 10 movies to get through. So, any other thoughts on All This in Heaven too?
no.
Okay, there you go. Short and sweet. That's how we like it here. All This in Heaven 2 nominated for 3 Oscars, only wins 0. Actually, it doesn't win any. The nominees it gets though, it gets Best Picture nomination. It is not nominated for Best Actress, and there's a reason for that we'll get to later. But it is nominated for Supporting Actress for Barbara O'Neill. The Academy, I guess, dug it. And then cinematography, black and white. But we are here in spooky season, so we got to talk about the master of suspense himself. Maybe his least suspenseful of the 2 suspenseful films he has in this slate. But regardless, we are talking about The Hitch. We are talking about Alfred Hitchcock. It is Foreign Correspondent. Chad, tell us about Foreign Correspondent.
Sure. Foreign Correspondent, directed by the Hitch or Alfred Hitchcock, written by James Hilton, Robert Benchley, Charles Bennett, and Joan Harrison. Cinematography by Rudolph Mate, ASC. Music by Alfred Newman. Starring Joel McRae, Lorraine Day, Herbert Marshall, George Sanders, Albert Basserman, Robert Benchley. Did I say that? No, I said that. Oh, he's a writer too. Oh, I got really confused. Sorry. Edmund Gwynn. I've heard of him before. Eduardo Cianelli and Harry Davenport. Synopsis: a foreign correspondent works to unravel a spy ring.
There you go. Was this a first watch for y'all? This was a first watch for
Mhm.
me. As a
Yeah.
Hitchcock fan, I was surprised I had not even really heard of this one. When we were doing like the slate, and I was like, oh, I was listening off the titles. I was like, wait, is this another Alfred Hitchcock film? Just because you think of Alfred Hitchcock, you think Vertigo and Rear Window and all these like famous Psycho, but those aren't the ones that get nominated. It's a lot of these earlier like 30s and 40s films that or his transition to America, which I think are very interesting to look at because it is still in the vein of Hitchcock, but it is a different type of Hitchcock than we're used to studying because it is less of the mainstream. So Chad, I'll start with you this time. What did you think of Foreign Correspondent by Mr. Alfred Hitchcock?
Yeah, I like this one. There's always kind of like a high expectation when you go into a Hitchcock film because you're like, this is probably going to be at least like really well done. There's going to be some suspense and stuff like that, and I really liked it. I liked how, you're following the American guy going to try to get like a scoop and maybe save his career or whatever. And he ends up like stumbling upon like a whole spy ring, as I mentioned, and a guy like dies like right after a trial, and then he goes and tries to like find out what the hell just happened. And then, he sees that like people are like covering stuff up and hiding things. And then ultimately, and then after that, he falls in love. And then, the father of the lady that he falls in love with is now trying to kill him. So I feel like a lot of these sequences are really good, really suspenseful. Like, I really love the when they go to the top of the tower and the guy's trying to push him off, and you're just like waiting for him to do it and waiting and waiting. That's Hitchcock just like makes you wait so long sometimes, but it's worth it because you're just like, I know he's about to do something. He's like waiting for that time where he can like push him off, and then the ultimate conclusion where he falls off the building. And then like I thought it was like really interesting because towards the end, it like goes on like a very like different path that I wasn't even expecting with the plane crash and trying to survive that and stuff. It's like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
That was like super fun way to subvert like what I was expecting. So
yeah, and it kind of puts you more in the actual conflict of the war rather than just kind of being, outside and adjacent to it. It's literally like, oh, now the plane's going to get bombed down. You're going to see this reality. And then also because he's been so passive this whole film, it very much seems like he's an observer, potentially like as a, actual conscious choice, like being very kind of second hand to everything that's going on. He's more of a bystander to where like that last sequence kind of like puts him in the action. Then you get that great follow up afterwards where he's like on the phone and he kind of literally spills everything. Even though he's not supposed to, he kind of leaves the phone on, and I just love things like that where it's like this great little kind of final cherry on the sundae. When you think you've kind of gotten the whole meat of the story, it kind of like it does that little third act big action set piece and then has this little final zinger of an ending, which I think is like Hitchcock's MO. He kind of builds to this big set piece. I mean, you see with Psycho as well. That's a good example of just like building to set piece, and then once you've hit it, you think that's it, and then it continues going, then it hits like another big one at the end, and then you get this like final resolution that some people hate. I love it in Psycho, but I do think he just really knows how to structure a film, like you said, making you wait the proper amount of time but then hitting you when it counts, which I think is very memorable, especially with this one as well, because I hadn't heard of this one, so I didn't know what those big spectacle and set piece moments were going to be. So that was very fun. Kerri, what do you think of Foreign Correspondent?
Yeah, this one was interesting. Again, not one of my favorites of this slate. I think prefer other Hitchcock films, including the other one we are going to talk about tonight. But I do think it was like a good movie. Like I would watch this again. The mystery was interesting. I did feel like parts of it kind of lagged a little bit, like I don't know, and maybe that's the theme with me with the slate is like the slower moving movies just didn't capture my attention quite as much. Yeah, and the third act is interesting. It's very different from the rest of the movie, which is interesting, but it also I don't know, it kind of did lose me a little bit, just because it was so different than the rest of the movie. And a really interesting, like, patriotic and like kind of call to fight, which totally makes sense for the time, but I think watching now it feels a little out of place. But again, it totally makes sense for the time.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
That's a really good point. Yeah, Chad, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, that's a good point as far as like pointing at something that like really can date something, but like not in a good way where it feels like 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 it's more like a product of its time rather than a timeless thing that just happens to take place in the past. But I also really like Dylan's point about how all this stuff is happening like mid-war. So to see like the entire story be uprooted by something that's happening in the war is actually kind of really interesting too. So I definitely see where Dylan's coming from with that and where Kerri's coming from that as well, where it somewhat feels a little preachy, but then again, like it makes sense like of the time period that it's in, like right in the heart of World War II, for it to be a little preachy. Carrie.
And I'll say, sorry, one more thing, because what you said sparked something for me, Chad, is that there's another movie in the slate that has a call to action about World War II that I think fits that movie much better. Like it flows much more thematically, and I think is, for me, it was just so much more powerful. And maybe in my mind, I'm just like unfairly comparing the two endings there, and that's why this one just wasn't as much of a high for me.
And we'll get there, but I think the moment that you're mentioning of the other movie kind of fits more about like a timeless kind of way. I think it's about execution.
Yeah, I mean, just building onto these points, yeah, it's very interesting because like this is, as I said earlier, like Hitchcock's introduction to American cinema. Like he was a British filmmaker and he's making his first movies in the Hollywood system. I think there's something kind of meta about the idea, like it's all about an American who goes to Britain, doesn't want to get involved in the war, is just kind of this correspondent, and then eventually has to kind of jump into it, which could be seen as preachy and propagandish. Like, oh no, you got to fight too. This is the whole world's concern. Like, don't have a blind eye to the war. But I also think there is a merit, at least at the time, of having that sentiment of like you can't just turn a blind eye to the war. You have to literally keep your, like, you have to look at it. You can't just be a bystander, because then it'll get worse. If you, not necessarily do you have to fight, but also just be noticing of it, which I think is kind of the point of the character arc and just the meta of Alfred Hitchcock himself, like being this guy going to America and making a story about how America is negligent to the war, only to then become involved, because at this point in 1940 they still hadn't gotten into the war, or they were like just about to. And I think when we talk about another film 2 films from now, that might be the one we're alluding to, I'm not sure, but like there is a very similar notion of that, of like, who was in the war versus who wasn't, and who was forced to reckon with things, or who chose to like stand idly by, which I just think is a very interesting notion, while it's also painted as this really thrilling crime drama as well. And like Chad said, like the windmill sequence, and like just all these great sequences that have this tension, just because Alfred Hitchcock's able to make it like that, just because he's just such a good craftsman. I think that's another thing too, is like the character himself is kind of boring. He's very bland, but yet you are still engrossed in his story because Alfred Hitchcock knows how to direct it and write it, which I think helps. I think if anyone else took this material, there may have been even more of a drag, more of a lull that Kerri was mentioning, because you don't have that skillful eye behind the camera. And I think that's true with a lot of these films we're going to talk about. I think a lot of the films would be much worse with different directors, but because they're made by some of the best filmmakers to ever live, you get a little bit extra oomph that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Chad?
Yeah, and just my last like little point is that you also do get a kind of fun little like romantic comedy, uh, romance that's building in the movie as well. Especially like when he goes to the where people are like speaking, and then he's like, no one's going to listen to these speakers anyways, and it turns out the girl that he's talking to that he likes is one of the speakers. So that's kind of a little funny bit there. But when we get to later movies that do like the comedy like a little bit better, and it's like all throughout the movie, I feel like you can also see that this one might still be a little bit weaker in that aspect as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I also wanted to bring up the plane sequence in general, just the craft of it, because I was reading up on how they did it. Because for 1940, the effects are really, really good. And I did look, and apparently they had like a big matte painting or whatever, and then they kind of cut slits in the back of the backdrop and funneled water through it to kind of give it an effect of a backdrop, but also have the practicality of the water, which I think is really cool. Like it's just things like that where you're like, this guy was a genius. He just really knew what he was doing really well, regardless of who he was. Like he was a great artist, and I think that's that's something to note. He's just really, really good at making movies. But we will talk a little bit more about him later, I believe, when we talk about another film that won this year. Any other thoughts on Foreign Correspondent? Cool.
George Sanders is fantastic in it.
Yes.
Iconic voice. We'll talk about him again later.
I was about to say, we'll talk about him later too. A lot of these movies, it's like, well, we'll address some things later in other movies or other directors or other actors. So Foreign Correspondent, nominated for 6 Oscars, doesn't win any either, but it is nominated for Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor for Albert Basserman. Sorry, there's like gray makeup in my eyelids. Orange screenplay, original screenplay, that's what that says. Sorry, I feel like my dad right now. Art direction, black and white. Cinematography, black and white. And fittingly so, special effects. But it doesn't win any of those. But what does win one of the biggest awards of the night, if not Best Picture, directors is the next best thing, and one of the best directors to ever live. The horizon is in the middle, it's boring. The horizons above or below, it's interesting. I totally butchered that quote. But let's talk about John Ford, baby. Let's talk about the grapes of wrath. I'm tripping over all my words today. It's the makeup, Chad. Tell us about the grapes of wrath.
Because it's if the horizon's not at the if the horizon's not in the middle, or if the horizon's not in the middle, it's boring as shit.
There it is. Yeah. If the
So
horizon's at the
If
top,
it is
it's
in the
interesting.
middle.
If it's
Sorry,
if it's in the bottom, it's interesting. If it's in the middle, it's boring as shit. Yeah, that's there
I
you go.
just wanted
I
to
don't
do my David Lynch impression.
That was a good one. That was a good one.
All right.
Which is extensively a John Ford impression because David Lynch and John
Right.
Ford, But anyway, tell us
Speaking
about
of,
the grapes of wrath.
The Grapes of Wrath, directed by John Ford, written by Nunnally Johnson, cinematography by Greg Toland, music by also Alfred Newman, starring Henry Fonda, Jane Darwell, John Carradine, Charlie Grapewind, Doris Bowden, Russell Simpson, O.Z. Whitehead, whose initials look like Oz, John Quaylen, Eddie Quillen, and Zeffie Tilbury. Synopsis: the Joad family are forced out of their home and travel to California to find a new life. Based on The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck.
There you go. This is our second Steinbeck. We covered in 39 of Mice and Men. So we're in another really sad, really depressing Great Depression era book adaptation. I was a bad student. I was a good student, but this was on the reading list and I skipped it. So this was my first time watching, reading, knowing about Grapes of Wrath. This was always kind of like this anomaly that I had never really known. Like for all I knew, it was about grapes and wine and juice. Like I really didn't know what this was even about. But I'll ask you both, have you guys seen this one before, or had you at least read the book?
I had never seen it, but yeah, I read the book in school. I just
Okay.
hadn't remembered like a lot of it, just a lot of like hardships and stuff. Kerri.
My teacher, this was on the required reading list for our entire grade, and my teacher refused to make all of us read the entire book. So she split us up into groups and had us each read 3 chapters and present on them.
I almost think that's worse than me not doing it at all.
Yeah.
Kind of.
That'd be like if we were like, Kerri, you watch the first 20 minutes, Chad, you watch the middle act, and I'll watch the ending of the movie, and we'll compare notes. But hey, it's an interesting exercise.
Yeah, and well, because some of the chapters, if I remember correctly, some chapters in the book are like it's kind of similar to like Les Miserables, where like some chapters in the book are like completely like
Different
kind of
quests and side
standalone and
adventures, and yeah,
unrelated. Like there's
cool.
a chapter
Yeah.
about a turtle, I think. Like I could be totally
Oh, you're
misremembering
right,
it.
actually. You're right. I remember that.
Chad's like,
Yeah.
I remember the turtle. You never forget it. That's very cool though. So we're all coming at like different levels of expertise. Kerri having read a third of the book, Chad having read the book, me having never heard of it. No, I've heard of it, but very interesting, different levels of knowledge. But I can't remember. Is this I don't think this is our first John Ford, but it might be. But
No.
I will look quickly.
I can look it up if you want to
Okay,
start talking.
Chad can look quickly if we want to start with Kerri then. Kerri, what did you think of The Grapes of Wrath?
Um, this one was kind of in the middle for me of the slate. Um, I thought it was a very well-made movie. Definitely with this movie and the other John Ford movie, I was thinking about that quote from oh, what's the movie?
The
Oh my God.
Fablemans?
Yeah, The
Mm.
Fablemans. Like the entire time watching the movie, I'm like looking at where the horizon is and everything and like how it's shot. I think a very well made movie, very well acted movie. Um, I guess part of why I didn't like this so much is just it's just it's a sad story and it's like continuously sad and it's a hard watch, which I don't
Mhm.
think makes it a bad movie. It just made it a movie that I enjoyed a little bit less than some of these other movies that were a little bit more either hopeful or thrilling. Um, so I like thought it was really yeah, a really well-made movie, just not something I would go back to again and again because the subject matter is, like it's so discouraging, and it reminded me a lot of, like, reading, stuff like The Jungle, where just everything just continues to go wrong and wrong and wrong, and I think this is such an important story because this is the life that a lot of people lived, unfortunately, and I think bringing attention to it is really, really important, and I think there are still a lot of messages that we can carry from this movie today. Um, Again, so it's not 100% towards the top of my list just because of like more of a rewatchability factor, but I
Yeah.
think it is an excellent movie.
Yeah, it's like when you have to kind of separate what is the best versus what is your favorite. Like you could
Yeah,
admit this is one of the better made. I mean, it wins best director. Like it's one of the better
yeah.
crafted movies of this slate amongst very good, directors. Like we'll get to a bunch of them later too. And we just talked about one with Alfred Hitchcock, but can you enjoy this is a different question. And this is one of those films that just feels like I agree. It's like you've seen it once, you're good because it is tough. It is heavy. It is, dour. It is sorrowful. It is purposefully so, but it is dark in a way that it doesn't make it fun. But it doesn't even have to be fun, but it does make it very difficult to sit through. And not even in a way for me with like something like Schindler's List, where I'm still like very engrossed and very ingrained in the story and like in the emotions. It's a tough watch, but I still find myself coming back to it for some reason. Whereas this, I don't feel that same way. But I agree with you. Like I think its artistic merits and its craft definitely outweigh the enjoyability of it. Which makes it difficult in like a ranking, but I do agree. I'm glad we agree on this one because I do think I was going in with such high hopes because it's John Ford. And I did look to also like we covered Stagecoach, which was the one
Yeah.
of his, and we both appreciated that for the craft, but not necessarily as engaged with it. So it might be a John Ford thing. If only we had another John Ford to compare it to later. But yeah, it might just be that where I'm so engrossed with the craft of it all, and especially his use of shadow and lighting. I mean, it is one of the most gorgeously directed films of that era, but it is very tough because it is also so raw and real of that time too. But Chad, what do you think of this one, Grapes of Wrath?
I actually kind of like this one. I think there's like some stuff that does drag it down. I think like you guys like aren't off. It is kind of a dour watch, but like Carrie also said, is that that's what people went through. So like,
Yeah.
making a film about it, I think is extremely important to see like how bad things got for people. Like, you know, this family's traveling across the country. I'm like, dude, like the thought about like, my father-in-law travels to California all the time. Like they've driven to California a lot. And I'm like, that's just like a few days for them to drive. But for this family, it's like a life or death thing. Like it's like a whole thing for them. Just trek to California, and stuff. So, to see that and to see like, people die during this trek and to see, you know, when they finally get there, it's like, well, this family is like not going to survive like being a family. Like we have to split off and like try to make it and try to survive and this whole thing. I think the other thing that kind of drags it down a little bit is one of those where like book to screen adaptations. I was reading that like people were talking about like how the book really enhances like a lot of the details, the other stuff. Like
Hmm.
you don't get any like shots of them before they were forced out. You get it like right when they're being forced out. So like you don't get to see them actually like doing their farm work or stuff like that, building that like happy, where they were happy on their farm, and then it starts to go south, and then they have to go south or west or southwest. And but that being said, even though you don't have that build up, you don't have the turtle, or anything like that. You still, I feel like you want to see this family make it because you get to see like the uh, predicament they're in. You get to see how you have the business like pay one of their own basically to demolish their farm and how
Yeah.
sad that is. And then when they finally get to California, you get to see how all of these things work, and how recently we've gotten with the writer's strike, and you have people being called scabs and stuff like that for breaking the strike, or people like businesses bringing in other people to fill those jobs while those people are striking, and it's just so interesting to see like a 1940s version of that. And to see, how they want to go work in the government run facility because, it's not people scrounging for, the last, piece of bread or whatever. And stuff. And yeah, ultimately, I think the performances are great. I love the scene when they go into the diner, and
Mhm.
then you get to see just how this family they're like, no, we don't want to like steal, we don't want to like take charity, we want to pay for what we have. We just don't have a lot, and it just you just really like kind of love this family and want to see them succeed. But like you guys said, it is kind of a dour watch too
Yeah.
because that's what people went through.
Yeah, and I do think, yeah, like you said, like I think it all depends on how engrossed you are with the family as well. It actually reminded me of another movie that we might be talking about at this year's Oscars, Blitz, where it's like something
Mm,
happens without fully establishing a relationship, where the whole movie stems on that relationship. Where if you don't have that kind of pretext beforehand, it might not
mm,
engross you as much. But I do think there's a testament to the actors and the writing and the direction where you can still find your way into this family's lives on the road, even if you haven't gotten the build up beforehand. I think that's a testament to the writing and direction here too. I'm very interested to read the book and then kind of go back and see what it irons out, because I think also we've gotten so many films like this. I think that's the thing with John Ford is a lot of his films, I feel like they've been like built upon in decades and decades since, and like the kind of formulas have been repeated. I mean, look at Stagecoach being like kind of the modern action movie template, that like would build into like Mad Max Fury Road. You look at those two films side by side, they're nothing alike, but if you just kind of go through every decade, you can kind of see the gradual build. And I think judging this in the context of other films like this kind of like misery porn, like, very drab, dark, dreary, political, like not really political, but like Americana stories, the darknesses of America and the people who are underprivileged and stuff like that. Like, I think like we talked about The Emigrants, which was not necessarily American story, but like another similar story of this family trying to like find a new home. And I'm a big fan of Fiddler on the Roof and like all these different movies and sources and different media that like also borrows from similar ideas. So I think if I read the book, I'll have a clearer picture on why this specific story does stand out a little bit more rather than just being a bunch of cliches. But you have to like kind of appreciate also the fact that the cliches stem from something. And in this case, they stem from this, in a similar way that you could look at a crime thriller and maybe Foreign Correspondent is that for that genre. It's just because we've seen it now going back and seeing the original, it doesn't, have the same might as it might have done at the time. Like I bet at the time this was an even bigger hit than it would have been today. But I do like it. I think it's very well made, especially. Yeah, Chad.
yeah, and I also think that like when you talked about going to read the book and then maybe revisiting this or something like that down the road, or just like remembering and then just being like, oh, that wasn't in the movie,
Hmm.
as happens with a lot of books to movie because you can't include every single thing. But I think one of the things that I read that they did leave out was just a lot of like of the characterization of different members of the family. Like certain members of the family, they just kind of like forget about and like don't
Mm.
even talk about anymore. And they have like a central like three characters or something like that. Um, which is not like necessarily a bad thing. Like a lot of the times in movies, you do want to focus on certain core characters, and stuff like that. But I feel like if they could have spent maybe a little bit more time like developing some of those characters, some of those relationships, maybe it could have been an even stronger movie.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and it's also cool that Of Mice and Men was a year before this in terms of the films. The books came out around the same time, but like I found that much more engrossing because I think the characters were a little bit more, well developed across the board, not just Lenny and George, but like all the different side characters as well. To which is I think exactly what you just said there, Chad, where like I think this one it centralizes on one or two people. I mean, Henry Fonda, a big star, you're gonna want to milk all you can from his performance. So I get it, but it's also like, yeah, I agree with you. I think if there's a way to better flesh out some of the supporting characters, it could make the experience just all the more richer. Because also then you have that personability rather than just like, oh, this is just 2 hours of misery. Now it could be like, but I do relate to them, and I now am able to like kind of tap into their experience a little bit easier. Like I do think there's certain things that can drive empathy further that I think could have been missing from maybe the adaptation. It sounds like, but I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like because like you hear like one big like quality of like certain films that people go like, that was a really good film, or like movies that feel lived in. They feel like people actually live there. um and it doesn't feel like they just set up a set. And I feel like that's why when you don't get like them being a happy family like in the beginning, it's also kind of just feels less epic in a way. And I feel like this is a story because it's like one of those great American novels
Right.
of tragedy, and like showing the story like we were talking about, like a time capsule showing the story of a family in tragedy, because it was a tragic time. It was like, what the Dust Bowl.
Dust Bowl, Great Depression. Yeah.
Yeah, the Great Depression. That's right. That's the term I was trying to think of.
You're
And
good.
I feel like, yeah, telling that story is extremely important. I just think like, even though, like you said, great direction, it deserved its nomination there. But I feel like, even like including like more depth from the book, more in like the setting and stuff too, I think could have made it even richer. But
There you go. Any last thoughts, Kerri, on Grapes of Wrath?
No.
No.
needed
Anything
more
else?
grapes.
Yeah, where are the grapes? Yeah, wait, they weren't drinking any, cabs or Chardonnays. Like, I don't understand. All right, Grapes of Wrath. That's a horrible joke to make about people in the Great Depression, but Grapes of Wrath, 2 for 7. It wins 2 big awards out of its 7 it's nominated for. It wins Best Director for John Ford, and it wins Best Supporting Actress for Jane Darwell. It's nominated for Picture, nominated for Actor for Henry Fonda, nominated for Screenplay, nominated for Sound Recording, and nominated for Film Editing. The Great Depression was like kind of the centerpiece, tragic, news story of the 30s. And then the 40s was World War II and the rise of Hitler and Nazi Germany. So very fitting that we go from kind of a story about the 30s to kind of transitioning into now the 40s, as this year is 1940, with a very interesting take on World War II from our very own Charlie, our very own, acting like he's a host of the channel, but our very well respected and renowned, our meaning cinema's greatest stars, Charlie Chaplin. Let's talk about The Great Dictator, Chad, and I mean the film.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we have like a lot of World War II, like Holocaust type films that we've covered previously. We got more to come. Hey, let's cover another one. The Great Dictator, directed by Charlie Chaplin, written by Charlie Chaplin, cinematography by Carl Struss and Roland Tothero, music by, can you guess? Charlie Chaplin and Meredith Wilson, starring he's apparently a triple threat. Charlie Chaplin,
In
Paulette
two roles,
Goddard,
Charlie Chaplin twice.
Maurice Moscovic, Emma Dunn, Bernard Gorsey, Paul Weigel, Chester Conklin, Jack Oakey, Reginald Gardiner, and Henry Daniel. Synopsis: a Jewish barber rebels against a fascist dictator.
Yeah. So yeah, heavy stuff, but told in a very Charlie Chaplin-esque way.
Yeah.
This is my first watch of this. This is, I think, arguably the most popular of the slate, because it is Charlie Chaplin. So, like Charlie Chaplin's career has been well preserved and well analyzed and well renowned. So this one, especially being like a talkie film of his, also helps kind of make it more notable, I guess, in the annals of history. But I had never seen it, and I'm very excited to now talk about it my first time. Had you guys seen this one before or no?
Mm-mm.
Ooh, first watch for all of us. Okay, so I will start with you guys because I really, really, really am very fascinated and curious to hear what you guys thought of this one. I forget who I started with last time. Chad or
Think
Kerri,
me.
take your pick. All right, Chad, you can go first with this one. What do you think of The Great Dictator, the film?
Yeah, I really kind of loved The Great Dictator. I think The Great Dictator is fantastic. I love Charlie Chaplin movies, like especially like the silent ones, but I feel like this one was just so interesting because we got to hear him talk, and we got to see him play like two very different roles. Um and I feel like he plays them like very distinct, so much so that like towards the end he has them like swap places, and then you get to see like one trying to be the other and how bad he is at being the one, until he gets to do his great speech monologue that is like extremely well written and like one of my favorite like moments in the entire slate here, and just like maybe like movies in general, that I think is so fantastic. But like before we get to that, I just love it kind of reminds me a little bit of like we covered it, Life is Beautiful, where you have, you know, and also Jojo Rabbit, which we will
Yeah.
cover at one point. That is like, you know, the blending of comedy and tragedy, and just really, really dark stuff. His take on, you know, Hitler, as far as, you know, making up an entirely different, like, fictitious dictator that just kind of models after, you know, Hitler. But just, you know, and just how farcical he can make it. Like, you know, there's an extended, like, you know, what do you call it? Interpretive dance that he does with a globe. Is it a globe, right? Globe
Yeah.
ball.
Yeah, like it's almost like a beach ball with the
Yeah,
world. Like it's a
yeah.
globe, but with the consistency of a beach
And he
ball.
like
Yeah.
gets on the table and like pushes it up with his butt and stuff. He's like doing some wild stuff with the physical comedy. And, you know, I love the building of the relationship between him and the guy that, you know, the Jewish, not him, but the Jewish barber, and the soldier he met in war that they now have a relationship with, and that, you know, basically helps him, you know, get to where he is. The relationship between him and his you know, significant other, like romantic interest, but then also show like the persecution of the Jews in a very real way. I'm not certain this ever really gets to a extremely harrowing place, because it's ultimately a very like farcical like comedy. Like, you know, you do have the bits where like someone like, what is it, like someone has the coin in their food and they get to sacrifice themselves. So you get like a whole comedy bit from that. Like no one wants the coin, so they're hiding it, and everyone has the coin, and it's just a lot of wild stuff. But ultimately, I just think it's so well executed, and I love pretty much everything Charlie Chaplin does. I just think it's so funny, but also when it really needs to make a statement, it does, and
Yeah.
it does it very well. So yeah, I kind of love this one.
All right. Kerri, what do you think of this one?
Yeah, I also I love this one a lot. I think it's really brilliant how Charlie Chaplin plays both parts in this movie, both the Hitler type character and an average Jewish person, ex like a veteran of Germany, or you know, it's not Germany, but it's basically Germany. Just and you can see like and I think it does such an excellent job of showing that these two people like physically and mental like they're not that different. Like you could be in either situation the way, you know, at the end they're able to switch and no one notices. Um, you know, you could be put in either situation and it's not that different in like appearance, yet Hitler is attacking people because of their heritage and their appearance specifically.
Mm.
You know, there's a scene where one of the generals is talking to the Hitler character about like, you know, we're gonna have this race of completely blonde, blue-eyed people, and then you're gonna be at the top. And he's like, oh yeah, my brunette self at the top. And like
Right.
it just points out, I think this movie does a really good job of pointing out like with humor the inconsistencies and the ridiculousness of what Hitler was saying and doing, and also what life was like for Jewish people at this time in Germany on the other side of the coin, and how incredibly difficult it was, and how it was really at the whim of the people who were um, enforcing things, you know. And oh, in this movie, it calls them stormtroopers, which I guess was a real term.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Totally didn't realize.
What
So
they were called
it
back
was like
then.
crazy.
And then you see like all the like Nazi like symbolism in Star Wars and stuff. So
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think this movie maybe doesn't go as hard on the even more horrible things that happen to Jewish people, because I feel like at this time it just wasn't as well known and wasn't quite as
yeah.
ramped up as it would be later in the war. Just everything was, there's mentions of concentration camps, but it's not really clear what's going on there. Um, and then I really loved Hannah's character. She was Hannah, yeah, she was amazing. And I love their relationship, and I like that relationship brought a bit of lightness to the entire movie, and I think made us feel even more for all of the characters. Um, and to humanize the story. And then the speech at the end is just so incredible. It's something, I don't know about you guys, but I had heard it in pop culture without knowing where it was from. And
Yeah.
then to start hearing the lines in the context of the movie, it was just like, I think, a really powerful speech.
Yeah.
And I know, I feel like it had an impact on me today in 2024. And I hope it also, I imagine it must have had an
Yeah.
impact on people back in 1940. So yeah, overall, I think just like an incredibly well done film.
And that's the thing I wanted to touch on too, just real quick, is this that, I was so excited to watch this one because it was in 1940 and it's like right in the heart of things. And it's like one of the, like we talked about the Three Stooges making fun of Hitler. I think maybe like one or two other people had done it, but before this, but Charlie Chaplin had been working on this feature length, like kind of like scathing, like, F you to Hitler kind of a deal. And I just think it was just so fascinating to watch. And like you said, Kerri, I think that speech at the end is something that is so relevant to today. So, but I'm very interested because Dylan has had like a flat, like kind of affect a lot. If he loves this or dislikes it,
Well, all right, here's the thing. You both really like it, and we've been talking with like the last few films. Like the first Betty Davis film, I liked a little bit more than you guys. Ford and Correspondent, I think I liked a little bit more than you guys. Grapes of Wrath, it seemed Chad liked it a little bit more than us, Kerri. But this one, you guys are saying it's a phenomenal masterpiece. It's great. I think it's the best thing I've watched on Picture This that isn't something I'd seen before.
I knew it was
I
a fake
think this
out.
movie, it's not even a fake out, but I'm just like, I can't believe. So I'm not gonna say it's the best movie we've ever covered on Picture This, because like we've covered E.T., we've covered The Godfather, like movies that I think are just masterpieces that cannot be matched. But this movie, in terms of just first watches that I had never seen before, not seen a lot from, like I didn't know the speech very well beforehand, going in, I had never seen a Charlie Chaplin film either. I am going in as
Wow.
blind as possible. So I'm going in knowing a few of his bits, seeing a few of his scenes, but not really knowing what to make of it. Also, because I think it's worth noting, this is before Hitler really became, I mean, Hitler was always evil, yes, but like this is like the very brink of it. This is not like the meat of the absolute terror of Hitler yet. So this was still early. This is before America's involvement, as we talked about it with the Foreign Correspondent. This was before America's involvement in the war as well. So America didn't really understand the gravity of this man. And I think for Charlie Chaplin, who had mostly done silent films, to jump into talkie films so successfully, write, direct, act, as you said, Chad, triple threat, and take shots at this guy who was not even common, who was not a common punching bag yet. It's not like, and I hate to be quite candid and frank, it's not like 2024 when people dunk on Trump in jokes and in media and stuff, when they've been doing it since 2016 on SNL. Like this is like if they were to do it in 2014 on SNL. Like this is insane how ahead of its time it was that he was able to suss it out and completely call him out on all his bullshit so early on and make this statement so powerfully, but do it in a comedic lens to where people can also understand the lunacy and the clown-like nature of it all. I hate to say that with this makeup on my face right now as a little clown myself, but like it is totally cartoonish in a way. But I think that's to emphasize the point that this is all ridiculous. This is all stupid. So to where the main speech at the end is not even, it's a speech about how we all have to have peace and love and acceptance, but he delivers it as if he's like angry and trying to spread hate messaging and essentially doing it at the same like inflection as like Adolf Hitler would.
Yeah.
And it just shows how people don't even listen to the words that people say. All they do is they hear rah rah and they go, yeah, yeah, yeah. But he's like, yeah, we got to be nice to each other. Ah, and they're like, yeah. And like, that's the whole joke of it, is the fact that these people will follow people blindly without actually listening to the words and realizing what is in the subject of it. I think the fact that his best gags in this movie are like when he goes on these long speeches earlier on and he has it's complete gibberish. Like all the words, you look at the subtitles, those aren't real words, and they're not, it's not German, it's not American. He's like doing some weird gibberish thing. That is someone who's a silent star taking advantage of the fact that he's doing a talkie film and saying, I'm going to create one of the funniest language spoken gags to match my physical gags. Like I just thought this was top to bottom so freaking good. And like from the start, like even before it dove into the Hitler stuff, when it's just him like in the war, before he has the amnesia with the plane where it's upside down, like all that stuff is so fun to me. Like I just grew up on Looney Tunes. This feels like a Looney Tunes cartoon, but dealing with a very touchy subject matter. And I agree, it doesn't go quite as, harrowing as it could. I agree with you, Chad, in terms of that. But I also think, this is, like Kerri said, very early on. Like, this is
Yeah,
not quite at that level yet where, if
true.
this were made in 1945, it'd probably be a much different film. But I think the fact that it is before all of it is even more mind blowing because he was just so on top of it and so early. And this really should have been a great warning. And I think it did act as a good warning. I don't know how influential this was in America's involvement in the war or in just kind of having this group consensus against Hitler. But I do think just it's such an important film because of that, because it shows that, hey, you might be wrong, but if you think there's something bad going on, you use your art to speak out on it. I think that's good. Now, there have been times where people have used their art and it's been harmful in that way, but I also think for this, it's like Charlie Chaplin was probably risking his whole career at this point to put this guy on blast, and he did it in such an interesting, unique way that I was so amazed by it. I was just so taken by this film, and I do think this is only a first watch, but I think every time I watch it, I'm gonna just get more and more from it, especially the comedy, because it is such smart comedy that like there are little bits you might not even notice because you're laughing at the last bit that you didn't realize the second and third bit happened while you were still laughing. Like I just love that about this film, and I'm excited now to watch Charlie Chaplin movies because I've only
Yeah,
seen some clips. I saw the Robert Downey Jr. Chaplin, but I've seen the musical Chaplin, but I've never seen his like original classic silent works. So
oh my God.
I'm very understudied when it comes to Chaplin.
You're
So this
you're
was
in you're in for a treat is
yeah,
all I
and
can say.
and and it sounds like this isn't even like your favorite Chaplin, which makes me excited that there's even better stuff out there. But like
It's
I just think
it's probably tied with the rest of them. I think like
okay.
they're all so fantastic.
Right,
They're
but to
just
hear that, like, everything else is on this level makes me even more
yeah,
excited because it really is someone that I've been waiting to watch, and I knew we were gonna do this, so I was like, "Oh, I'll watch The Great Dictator when it comes." I might, pick up some Criterions and watch some of his stuff, and it just has never come up yet, and I know I'm gonna get to some also in my Sight and Sound podcast, but I'm like, "Wow," like, I've been sleeping on this guy for too long, and I think it's because it is such, like, a basic thing to like, "Oh, yeah, I'll check out Chaplin someday," and you keep pushing it off and off and off, and I'm so glad I didn't now. I'm glad I finally ripped off this Band-Aid. Not that it was painful, but I'm so glad because it is so smart. And again, because it is such touchy subject matter, there is a world where this is a total misfire. There's a world where he's, you know, really in danger for what he's doing. I mean, we see nowadays all these like Middle Eastern filmmakers who can't even edit their films in the countries they're from because it's against
yeah,
their codes and stuff. Like he's lucky this passed code, and it's so amazing he passed code, and it's just because he changed the name of his country. Like that is wild to me, and I just love that a film in 1940 can be this bold and this frank about everything
yeah,
going on. And like you said, he's great in all the roles. Like he just so seamless in all his comedy, all his different gags and the relationships. As Kerri said, his love interest, I was so charmed by that as well. Her name's Hannah, right? Paulette Goddard's
yeah,
character, Hannah. Yeah, I love everything about it. Like I was always in it. And I know I've been reading reviews and everyone's like, oh, that last speech, and I'm like, okay, so it's gonna be a good watch, and then that last speech is gonna hit, and then I'm like, wait, why isn't anyone talking about this moment or this moment or this moment? I'm like, it really is one of those films that every scene is the best scene until the next scene's a better scene, you know? And I love that. I love it. So yeah, sorry to be like facetious, but
No,
yeah,
I liked it. I liked the kind of like
well,
it to still like it and
because you
just
guys
like
were really praising it, and I was like, like I yeah,
it's almost like what is it like in the darkest hour or whatever when you're waiting for that guy to do that one thing or whatever to say that he proved something, or like doesn't Anton Ego or whatever do something at one point when the meal's really
maybe.
good or something like that, and he's just like,
The where he's
you
like,
know
I need to talk to the chef, and the chef comes out, and they're like, ah, that's it, you're fired, and he goes, my
yeah,
compliments to the chef, and it's like, oh,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
all right,
exactly,
yeah,
like
like
you're
something like that. I don't know if I'm quoting
does
the moment
does
directly, but
Dylan approve? And then you're like,
not that it needs any
yeah,
approval, but I love that this is the first one that we've all kind of been on the same page about too, because it is just one of those
yeah,
undeniable masterpieces, especially considering this decade, and we've covered some years in the 40s. A lot of it is just like World War II shit that can sometimes get a little grating. Like we covered
mhm,
41 with Dan, and there were several films there where I was like, okay, it was a
yeah,
43, not 41. 41 is Citizen Kane, but yeah, 43. And I just remember some of those films really hitting, but some of them just feeling like they were just made to make films because they needed to make films to make people feel better during that time.
propaganda pieces and
Yeah,
all that.
whereas this one makes people feel better during the time, but also makes sure that you understand what's going on in the world and not shying away from it, but still making it palatable enough to where the people who maybe are a little bit more skeptical aren't like, all right, sure, you're gonna dunk on this dictator, like who are you? But I love how it can be all those things,
Yeah,
which I
and
love. Which yeah,
I can't wait to see you get to like modern times, the gold rush, city lights,
yeah,
especially like modern times where he's like, kind of has like a whole take on like the modern like industrial movement and all that stuff. So
yeah.
yeah, very excited to hear your thoughts on those too.
Yeah, big fan of this. It's a good one. Sorry, I know we each kind of went on our own like long passionate speech, but does anyone have anything to add to the Great Dictator? I mean, it's such a good film. I feel
So
like
funny.
it needs another 2 hours of discussion, but it's just so good. Anything
I
else?
want to watch it again.
Yeah, cool. Well, maybe we'll watch it again someday and do this all over again. Just kidding. Imagine that if we watched 20 films. Great Dictator doesn't win any Oscars. Can't believe it. But again, I think if this Oscars had happened in 46, it would have won Best Picture. I think it's one of those things where they didn't realize how great it was. Nominated for 5 Oscars, though. Picture, actor for Charlie Chaplin, does not even get director. Best Supporting Actor, Jack Oakey. Best Original Screenplay, and Best Original Score. Oof, how do you segue? Okay, you want to know what this hat's made of? It's made of foil, baby. Let's talk about Kitty Foyle, Chad. Whew, I had to think of that one on the spot.
Judas Priest, Kitty Foyle, directed by Sam Wood, written by Dalton Trumbo, cinematography by Robert DeGrasse, music by Roy Webb, no relation, maybe, I don't know. Starring Ginger Rogers, Dennis Morgan, James Craig, Eduardo Cianelli, Ernest Cosart, Gladys Cooper, Odette Myrtle, Mary Treen, KT Stevens, and Walter Kingsford. Synopsis: Kitty Foyle faces a difficult choice between a wealthy man and a poor doctor, based on Kitty Foyle by Christopher Morley.
Yes. Kitty Foyle, the subtitle being The Natural History of a Woman. So if you wanted to know the authentic, 100% real woman experience, Kitty Foyle is the movie. It's the one and only. But as our resident lady here on the panel, Kerri, I'll let you open with this one for Kitty Foyle. What did you think of Kitty Foyle, The Natural History of a Woman?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I really like this one. It took me a little bit to get into it. And especially because, like, you kind of get the sense, even from the beginning, that this wealthy man that she is in love with, well, because the movie starts out in the future. Well, it starts out with this weird little prologue, and I think
About
that's
how life was so great until women could have the chance to vote.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
yeah,
work,
and
and
that's
how
Yeah, like, oh,
working
women, women can drive
working doesn't
cars now.
I
that
Like,
wish I could
working
just
doesn't really work out for them that much. They get really tired.
Yeah, I wish I could clip out that part of the movie because literally the rest of the movie has nothing to do with that. And I don't think that's really the message of the movie at all. It's about this woman, Kitty Foyle, and, kind of her trials and tribulations in her lifetime and in love. And, like, yeah, this ultimately the decision she needs to make between two men. But when we start out with Kitty in the future, she has to decide between a doctor who she's currently in a relationship with, and a wealthy man who is willing to leave his wife and son and take her just off to South America. So you kind of are like already skeptical of this wealthy man, and you're like, why is she so in love with him? Why is she willing to risk it all to leave with this guy who just really, if he's willing to leave his wife and child, just does not seem that good. And then you kind of see the entire story develop and how they meet and fall in love. And I really liked that when you look at the entire story and how things happened for her, it seemed reasonable that she would be so in love with this man because he was, incredibly charming, and they did seem to be genuinely in love, and a lot of class issues kind of kept them apart, and prevented um, their relationship from maybe blossoming as much as it could have. Um, and you see Kitty kind of struggle with all of the decisions she has to make and go through the heartbreak of not only losing this man who she loves, because she realizes, like, it just wouldn't work out without him suffering, like, financially, and maybe just in his lifestyle, and she's not willing to do that to him. But she also loses a child in this movie, which is just so incredibly heartbreaking. And at the end, she does make her decision. You're kind of like, you're really just so invested and you're rooting for her. And I think Ginger Rogers just makes this movie. Um, she is just so incredible, and she does make you fall in love with this character, Kitty Foyle. Um, and just the personality she brings. I don't think this movie would be as good, nearly as good, if someone else was maybe in this role. Um, so overall, I liked it. There were things that, especially that beginning part that I could have done without, and those are kind of the things that made this movie a little bit more middle of the pack for me. But I did really really love it.
Nice. That's a cool perspective because, like, yeah, I that first part was so struggling for me. Like I was struggled so much with it because I think it's like you set the tone for what the movie's gonna be, and then the movie is a little different, but then you're wondering if the subtext is meant to be like, oh, this woman and all her problems because she's so entitled. Like, and it does make it tough at times. But I think, yeah, if you separate that beginning and kind of what the filmmaker has to say, because I don't really know if that's like a Sam Wood decision, if it's the writing decision, if it's the source material, because I've also heard the source material is a little bit more biting. It does have a little bit more to it in terms of just the women experience. It's not just about which man she wants, but she faces some other different trials and things that like does kind of show this really well-rounded female experience. But it's also like you have to think about the times in like 1940. This is just revolutionary in the sense that it is telling this woman's story regardless, but it's also like it's 1940, so there are still those little judgments, especially being made by a film made by men despite it starring women. And I know Chad and I have had these conversations, just off air sometimes about like who is or isn't allowed to direct certain movies. And it's like there is no, person who can or can't direct a certain film, but it does lose a little bit of authenticity depending on who the voice is because you just have a different gaze and a different perspective. And I think it's very interesting to look at like, okay, Ginger Rogers, what she brings to the role might be different than what Sam Wood brings directorially to the piece versus what the editor brings when they put that little opening in there as well. Like and what the book wanted to say. Like I think it's interesting to see how different voices kind of culminate to tell a story that is very, in terms of the subtitle of this, the actual like natural history of a woman, that's a big kind of expectation to set. So I definitely didn't know where I ended up on this one. This was kind of just like a mixed bag because I don't really know what to take out of it and what to make of it. I did enjoy watching it, but it's also one that I've thought about a little less in the grand scheme of the slate and at large. Like I think I am remembering her performance more than I'm remembering like certain elements of the movie, certain plot beats, certain directorial stylistic choices or edits or cinematography moments. Like I'm thinking mostly about the performance because I'm a big Ginger Rogers fan. Everyone knows me. I'm a big musical guy. So, it's cool to also see her in a non-musical role for once, something a little bit more dramatic and less like, I'm going to sing and dance now, which is like what I grew up loving Ginger Rogers and like Fred Astaire for. So, definitely cool from that perspective. And I believe the Kitty Foyle dress is like, yeah, like that's like a real thing that this movie inspired, like the Kitty Foyle dress, which I didn't know that's where this stemmed from. I didn't even know that's what that was called. I don't even know what the pattern of the Dorothy dress is called, and I heard it once and I thought they were saying Gangnam Style. But I don't, what is it called?
Gingham, I
Gingham. Yeah,
think.
that's what it is. Yeah, I remember someone was like, yeah, a gingham pattern. I'm like, what is that? They're like, the Dorothy dress. I'm like, oh, okay. So like I'm just not in with the fashion trends, but I thought it was cool that like there's a dress inspired by this film. Like the Kitty Foyle dress is like a thing. So Chad, what did you think of Kitty Foyle?
I also loved Kitty Foyle. I thought it was fantastic. It is one of those things that you guys raised like that kind of like issue about it, like at the very, very beginning. And then, like, if you read through like some of the, background for a lot of these movies, like this is like, kind of deep within like the production code. So they're like changing,
Right.
a lot of things and stuff. About things like, there's some movies that like have like divorce in them and stuff like that, and that was like a very taboo kind of thing, but nowadays like that's kind of a normal thing that just happens. um uh, but I kind of like liken this a little bit to, and we covered this when we covered 1939, Gone with the Wind. It's just the year
Hmm.
before,
Mhm.
where with the Wind starts with, that, a time gone by, and, oh, how great this time was in the South. And
Right.
then you go on to watch a movie that is, filled with, a lot of like very, outdated, stuff, stereotypes, and just like, poor treatment of, people of color and stuff like that. So I feel like with that movie, it kind of makes a statement, and then it like follows through with that statement, and then you just go like, well, that was a very beautiful movie, but like really like hard to watch at times. And it's like I feel like it's just so outdated, and just like doesn't we don't want to like, watch that movie as much anymore maybe. But this one, I feel like you guys said, it kind of like says that and then takes a departure where it feels like it is like a woman that like can make her own choices, and kind of says like, it's harder or it's easier for men because like, men are single because they choose to be, and stuff like that. And it really feels like, I like following the story of Ginger Rogers as Kitty Foyle, stuck with a really tough choice because, like Kerri was saying, you wonder why it's such a hard choice for her, because you're like, this is such an easy choice, Kitty. What are you doing? Like I remember specifically, and this, is going to be hard, a little harsh language, but Kerri and I were watching the movie, and she like made the choice to run out on this sweet doctor, and then I went like, this bitch. And then Carrie was like, yeah, I know. And then we get to see like a whole movie, like why it's way, way more complicated. And, she's not, actually, that, sorry to use such hard language, but I just thought it was funny. But yeah, and then we go and we see this whole story of her falling in love with this guy, and how hard it is to let love go like that, but then maybe it can like blossom into something else if you have like another person that comes into your life, that might be better for you. It might be really still easy to fall back into a bad situation,
Mm.
where she didn't want to or didn't think she could, become like this like socialite. Like she didn't fit within that family. Like, we'll see that in another film that we're going to cover later on. Like, can you fit into this family when you come from more of like meager beginnings? Can you, become like a wealthy person and just start acting like that? Because it's a very different world. Actually, a
Yeah,
couple films we're going to touch more on that kind of like class issues and stuff like that. It's a lot
absolutely.
of that in the slate. Um, but yeah, ultimately, I just really love the story. Like Carrie was talking about, it's very tragic when you get to the, scene where she has like the miscarriage, um, and how, kind of like personal that is, for us, having a kid and stuff like that. And then, seeing her relate to this like little boy, and, she sees that, he has like, his dad's name, and like how she connects with him and gives him the ring, almost like a, goodbye kind of a thing, but almost to like, also like let him know like, oh, I know, and stuff like that. So I just love how it starts off with a big question, and then it like goes through and shows you kind of like a Sunset Boulevard kind of a
Mm.
thing, or a what was the one we just talked about? And all that, and
All this in
all
heaven too. Yeah.
too. Um, that where you ask the question, well, what did happen in the past? And I think, what ultimately we see the story play out, like the relationship between her and her father and stuff, I think is really sweet, and stuff. So yeah, I ultimately I liked everything that culminated in it, and I just love the ending where it's like, you're wondering if she's going to make the right choice, and then she starts saying something, tell this person this and this and this, and you think she might be saying goodbye to the doctor, and then she goes, and now take me to the hospital. And
Mm.
then you're like, oh, she made the right choice at the very end,
Yeah.
and stuff. But and that like he's very good with like kids, and they would probably have a really great, child together, and that's something that she really wants. And yeah, so I don't know, I really like this one.
Yeah. No, and I love hearing you two talk about it because it does make it a little bit better in my eyes, because at the end I was like, she should say that her choice is herself, because if this is a
Yeah.
feminist piece, like she don't
Yeah.
need no man, but it's 1940, and they want to give you some sort of Hollywood ending of like she will choose someone, and I think just the fact that she gets the right to choose, and she's making that decision, it makes it a little bit more, you know, impactful, for the time. So
There,
yeah, a lot.
and
Yeah, go ahead.
there's another movie in this slate where someone could also have made that same decision, but maybe didn't.
Yeah, we'll talk about it all later. Yeah, this is a very interesting slate for like just the changing of not just the wartime, obviously, but also just women's issues and just
Yeah.
societal norms and all that stuff as well. So, very fascinating. I did look up the Kitty Foyle dress. I feel like Ruth Bader Ginsburg used to rock one of these. So that's like the
Nice.
famous Kitty Foyle dress that you can buy on Etsy now for $40. If anyone's interested, we don't have any promo codes, but tell them that we sent you there. Any other thoughts on Kitty Foyle? Alrighty, Ginger Rogers, obviously the big winner for Kitty Foyle. It wins 1 out of 5, but she is the big one for Best Actress. It is nominated for Best Picture, nominated for Best Director for Sam Wood. We'll hear about him later, and Best Screenplay and Sound Recording. So, Ginger Rogers had to sadly write some letters to all her fellow nominees, apologizing for steamrolling them at the Oscars. She had to write a letter, particularly for Betty Davis, who lost the Oscar for the letter. Chad, tell us about the letter. I don't know if people do that, if they write letters to the other nominees or if they just say it in their speeches, but I don't know. Segues are segues. There's 9 segues I have to make today. So, Chad, tell us about the letter.
Yeah, sure. In a second, I did want to add. I think the little boy in Kitty Foyle is also in All This in Heaven too. The little
Very
boy
cool.
from that. I think it's the same actor. Yeah, the
Love a crossover.
letter.
Well,
The letter. Direct. What, Carrie?
I'll say it when we get to it. Actually, there is definitely one of the kids. The girl in the Philadelphia story is one of the kids in All This in Heaven too.
Really? I didn't know
Yes.
that. Cool.
There's everyone's in all these films. Like
Yes.
Betty
Yeah.
Davis is in a bunch, and Sam
There's
Woods
a
directing
lot.
a bunch,
Yeah.
and what's his name? Sanders is in a bunch. Like, wow,
Yeah.
jeez, they get work. Why can't we all have that?
Yeah. The letter, directed by William Wyler, written by Howard E. Koch. Cinematography by Tony Gaudio. Music by Max Steiner. Starring Betty Davis, Herbert Marshall, James Stevenson, Frida in Escort, Gail Sundergaard, Bruce Lester, Elizabeth Earle, Cecil Calloway, Sin Young, Doris Lloyd, Willie Fung, and Tetsu Komai. Synopsis: a woman kills a man and faces trial for her crimes. Based on the 1927 play, The Letter by W. Somerset Maugham. And this is also, I believe, a remake of the 1929 film, The Letter.
Very cool. Yeah. Anything else, Chad, for the letter, for background, or can I jump into it?
Jump into it.
Okay, I'll open with this one just because I feel like this is the one I have the least to say, not negatively or positively, but I do think it's very interesting. We talked about like All This in Heaven too, how like there's that inciting incident of like the framing device where we don't necessarily know what happened, but we're getting it kind of in retrospect, and we kind of go back. And even with Kitty Foyle, it's like older Ginger Rogers is visiting younger Ginger Rogers in the mirror, and there's intrigue to that. Here it's very interesting because we see the murder early on. It's the first thing we see. So I just found it very interesting that the whole film, at least a majority of it, is kind of this question of did she or did she not do it? But you see it. And I just thought that was a very interesting approach because I feel like nowadays, if you make a movie like this, you would never show the murder itself because I feel like a lot of the intrigue is did she do it or did she not? Here it's she did it. How does she get away with it? And I just thought that was a very interesting, different approach to the story, which I guess the modern approach is the different approach. This was the original approach to a story like this, but I just found it also a little disengaging because of that. I felt like it started so strong with that moment, but then as every scene trickled on, I was like, okay, but yeah, she did it, and we know it's Betty Davis, so obviously we know she did it. We know she's gonna be able to like twist her way out of things, and then we find out she's also a big bigoted racist as well, and then we also get like a really interesting conclusion and the letter. But I did feel like all the drama and the dramatic tension after you see that first scene, it kind of minimizes some of the intrigue and mystery that could have been made. But I am interested to hear what you guys have to say for it. Because again, I watched these over a month ago. So like this one is faded from my memory the fastest, I think, despite knowing, I remember leaving it being like, oh, I loved Betty Davis in that, but that's kind of where the extent of it was. And I just remember being like, Man, I would have wished for maybe me not to know if she killed him or not. That would have added a little level of intrigue. But you two have watched it a little sooner than me, so I wanted to just get my thoughts out because maybe you guys might be able to refresh my mind on like some of the stuff that happens in that middle portion because I can remember how it ends and I remember how it starts. But yeah, I'm very curious what you guys thought of the letter. We'll start with you, Chad. What did you think of the letter?
Well, I will say, if you kind of like the letter, but could have liked it a little bit more, I will recommend to you the movie Serial Mom by John Waters, which is
Oh,
very very kind of similar, where you get to see certain crimes happen, and then you're just like waiting to see like what's going to come of it.
mm,
And I feel like this is kind of a very similar thing, where it starts off really crazy. Like it
yeah.
starts off at a murder scene, and you're just like, whoa, okay, what's going to happen?
It's the best opening, I think, of any of these films. Just like
Yeah,
hitting you, like there's this film festival that they do in California that Whitney Seibel was talking about, where what they'll do is they'll show the first 5 minutes of like 10 movies that no one's ever heard of. They're like B movies or very obscure movies, and then the audience gets to vote on which one they watch. And I think if we were to do this with these movies, having never seen them, play the first 5 minutes, I feel like between this and The Great Dictator, one of those would have won. Like I feel like most people would vote for the letter because
yeah.
that first 5 minutes is very, very punchy. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and I think like ultimately, because like the question is not necessarily like did she do it like throughout. It's almost kind of like, well, what preceded that? Because we don't
Right.
see
What were
what
the
preceded
intentions?
it.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. And it's like she says that he came there and was like basically about to sexually assault her. Like he was very like aggressive with her, and she had to do what she did. It was self-defense. So, if you kill someone in cold blood, that's gonna be your defense, is that they were attacking you and you had to do it. And so and then I like to see like how things start to unravel, and we get to like see like there's like a mysterious letter that kind of like makes it to where maybe she was more like kind of culpable in this, and she invited him there, and there was like an actual like fling going on that she wanted to hide from her husband, um and stuff. And then that plays into the whole thing where he wants to run away with her to go to another place, especially because she's now in trouble and all this stuff, wants to get away from all of the opinions and stuff. And turns out that she paid a large sum of money with his lawyer to get this letter back. And you know but the person that she's getting the letter from is the wife of the person who died, that now has like a huge grudge and stuff. I do agree with you though, Dylan, that I think there is like a good section of this movie in the middle that starts to drag a little bit, and we were just kind of like, okay, now where is this going? Because I think it's kind of running out of steam a little bit. But then I think like where it kind of heats up a little bit more is like when she finally uh Betty Davis and the lawyer go to get the letter from this widow, and that scene I think is pretty tense, because you're wondering what's going to happen. Like, is
Yeah.
she about to kill her or something like that? And she gets it, and then that tension kind of dies down a little bit. But then it picks up later
Mhm.
when like she goes to her balcony and there's like a knife there, and you're like, oh shit! So like someone's threatening her basically. And then you get to see this man kind of struggle and basically like go into a deep depression because his wife has just been lying to him and cheating on him and then murdering somebody but behind his back and just doing all this crazy shit. um and then ultimately you get the end murder and stuff like that. I just think I just love how it was kind of like directed with like the use of like the like I think it had like really great like cinematography, like the use of shadow, and just like
Mhm.
the way it like focuses. It like takes its time to build that tension, kind of like a Hitchcock movie without being a Hitchcock movie.
Yeah.
And so Hitchcock-esque.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I didn't think this was like maybe like the best of the slate, but I did think it was actually really good, even if it might have had some pacing issues. But I'm not even sure if it did ultimately have
Gotcha.
pacing issues. I think maybe it just took its time. Uh,
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm glad you clarified because, as I said, like there were some details that were hazy. So yeah, we do know she killed him very early on. Everyone knows. It's the question of was it self defense or was she intentional? And I think
Right.
that was my problem. Is I was like, it's Betty Davis. Of course she meant to do it. Like I think that was my thing. Is like you don't cast Betty Davis in a role like this if she's this sweet innocent woman with self defense. Like I think that's where I was coming from. I was like, she's. I mean, it's Betty Davis. This is all about Eve we're talking about. But I think that's kind of where my kind of the intrigue and mystery wasn't as strong for me. But I'm glad you brought up those elements because I'm recounting certain moments now that I'm like, oh yeah, that was engaging, that was intriguing. It's just some of the middle part, as you said, kind of faded away. But Kerri,
Oh,
what did you? Oh, chat.
I
Go
did
ahead.
want to add real quick, and Carrie can touch on this too if she wants. It was crazy to see like her like wild, like eyed stare when she kept looking up at the moon.
Oh
For
yeah.
a few times, I was like, she about to turn into a werewolf? What's going on?
It would be perfect for this slate for this time of year. But
Yep.
Kerri, what did you think of the letter?
Yeah, I mean, I think it felt similarly to you guys. This one was like very middling for me. Like, I thought it was an interesting story. And like you said, Dylan, I think it just could have been conveyed better in a movie. Like there were such interesting concepts in this movie. And I thought Betty Davis was really fantastic in it. And it was great to see the contrast between her and this movie. She's like pretty villainous, and All This in Heaven too, where she's like basically a saint.
Mhm.
So that was kind of fun to see the two extremes of Betty Davis.
And both she's like kind of sort of culpable of murder, maybe, or like not really
Not
culpable, but like
not in All This in Heaven too.
yeah, but
Well,
she's like questions.
Well, and I think the reason that one was more intriguing for me is because, like I said, like you expect Betty Davis to be the murderer. So when she
Hmm.
turns out it was Charles Boyer in that movie, I was like, oh wow, this is interesting. We're not seeing that side of Betty Davis. Whereas here, I was like, maybe we're gonna. So maybe I was thinking watching this, I was like, maybe we are gonna get
Hmm.
more of the like, oh no, she was actually self defense, but then it ended up not. But I love how just casting Betty Davis as is opens up all those questions. Like I love how an actor has that power. I'm trying to think of an actor modern day where it's like they're casting something and you're like, oh, I wonder if this is gonna happen type deal. I got to think on it, but I'm not sure. Like if J.K. Simmons is casting something, is like, oh, is someone gonna have a really horrible boss or something or teacher?
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of other examples, but Carrie, continue. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think overall though, like I wanted to like this movie a little bit more than I did, and there were yeah, there were interesting concepts here, but I think just not fantastically executed. And like you guys said, I think there are some pacing issues in this movie. It did drag in some places. I could feel in some places, like especially the end scene where Betty Davis is constantly like looking up at the moon and she's like walking through the pathway and everything. It seemed like the director was trying to build tension, but almost like there wasn't. And I think this is a theme really throughout the movie, and you were touching on, Dylan, there wasn't really any tension there because you had seen the knife earlier. You knew she's
Right.
probably gonna get attacked by this widow who's just been like death staring her the entire movie, and the widow only gave her the letter so she could like basically ruin herself before she murdered her. So
Right.
yeah, interesting story. Like I thought it was like a generally a well made and well acted movie, but things could have been better.
Yeah. I just really want to touch on quickly because I've read a few things about this just in prepping for this episode, just the use of Asian characters and in general as well. Did you guys have any thoughts on just that and how that was handled? Obviously, she says some things that are a little bigoted, but I guess because she is a murderer, it's a little bit more justified. We're not supposed to be rooting for her necessarily, but did you think it was in poor taste or just in line with what this character would be doing and saying?
Yeah, I ultimately didn't really think that there was like that much, like especially for like a 1940 movie,
Mm,
that it was like that like disrespectful or had like a whole like racial like or like racist overtone to it or anything or
yeah.
undertone to it. I felt like I don't know. Kara, what did you think?
Yeah, I it's hard to tell, right, with this, like especially a movie this old, you don't I feel like it's a little difficult to tell the intentions because Betty Davis is making those statements, and it's like, are you supposed to like think like I think nowadays we watch that and we're like, oh yeah, she's a horrible person, but like was that the intention, or like And I think some of the characters were maybe a little bit stereotyped and ridiculous, like not fully fleshed out. Like we have,
Mm.
the widow who's kind of just out to get her revenge, and that one guy in the scene where they actually like buy off the letter who's just like really high or something like
Yeah, it's like little things like that that at the time probably weren't as, the microaggressions were microaggressions, but like nowadays they're much more visible, maybe. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I just think it's interesting too, because it's like, I think watching this back now, if you know that she's culpable, it's not as bad because you're like, oh no, okay, they are doing well. But in the moment, if you are wondering, maybe she is innocent and she's trying to make them out as the villains for having this dirt on her and trying to get the revenge, it could be portrayed as like, oh, these nasty, whatevers, as like a grouping of a whole rather than like these characters are trying to like, trying to convict me of something I didn't do type deal. But now that you know what she did and that she is responsible, it makes it a lot easier to now side with them and be like, no, she's treating them awfully. Whereas I think if she did turn out to be innocent, those things would be even worse because then it's like now you're trying to group a the type of person with the fact that they are trying to bust her with this letter type deal. But I like that there are characters though, like Asian characters that do have
Yeah.
prominent roles. Like I think for
Yeah.
Hollywood, that's a good thing, especially because we wouldn't really get a lot of that till when we Sayonara, Chad, like late 50s, mid 50s. So
Yeah.
at least another decade. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. The Letter, nominated for 7 awards, also wins 0. There's a lot of zeros here. I guess just a lot of other films just picking up more awards. The Letter, nominated for Picture, Director for William Wyler, Actress for Betty Davis, Supporting Actor for James Stevenson, Original Score, Cinematography, Black and White, and Film Editing. Dorothy, we're still on this yellow brick road. We're about halfway through, right? We got 4 movies left. But man, is it just such a long trek down the road, the yellow brick road, just such a long voyage home. There's no place like home though. But there is also no place like Picture This, Chad. Tell us about the long voyage home, Chad.
We're talking about The Long Voyage Home, directed by John Ford, written by Dudley Nichols, cinematography by Greg Toland, music by Richard Hageman, starring John Wayne, Thomas Mitchell, Ian Hunter, Barry Fitzgerald, Wilfred Lawson, John Quaylen, Mildred Natwick, Ward Bond, Arthur Shields, Joseph Sawyer, and J.M. Kerrigan. Synopsis: the crew of an English cargo ship faces challenges during World War II. Based on the plays The Moon of the Caribbees, In the Zone, Bound East for Cardiff, and The Long Voyage Home by Eugene O'Neill. I know I wanted to say we're, but I didn't know where it was going to go, so.
It's okay. I appreciate you. We'll be dancing off soon into the sunset. We got 4 more movies. Long Voyage Home, though, our second John Ford movie of the slate. Again, the visuals, man. Ooh, mwah. You have this big steel ship and all these like moonlit sequences. I'm like, and the water. I'm like, this is just unreal. Just so gorgeous, so gorgeous. But let's talk about the movie itself. I mean, that is part of the movie itself, but all the other things, the other parts of this long voyage, if you will. I think it's very interesting, Chad, because we covered Master and Commander on our 2003 episode. And I do feel like this is a very similar type of story where it's like we're just going to be a slice of life of these guys on the ship showing just kind of what they go through in their everyday lives. It's not really going to have a story. You're not going to really have this beginning, middle, and end. It's more so just like living with these characters, and we may venture off toward the end into something next for these characters, but it is very much kind of this slice of life essentially, which at 1940, in the middle of this war, you'd expect war films to be these big propaganda pictures or big, war epics, or even like Great Dictator, this kind of big farcical, big comedy. But here it's a slice of life drama, which I thought was very, very striking, especially John Wayne. You expect him to also have a little bit more gusto, but he's kind of playing this more subdued character as well, with the worst accent I've heard in a long time. But that's my only negative on the film. But I do think, yeah, very interesting film. When I was expecting this, I saw naval ships and big war epic. I was like, all right, I know what I'm getting into, and it was totally different than what I expected. But Kerri, what did you think of The Long Voyage Home?
Yeah, this is another one I think is very well shot and well acted. And normally I actually really like slice of life movies. But this one, I don't. Maybe it's just the subject matter. It was not my favorite. Just like a bunch of dudes on the ship and their daily life and like how they get drunk every time they get into port and then say they're not going to go back on the ship and then they do. Um, I thought the most interesting part of this movie, and I really like this part, was the because this is in the middle of the war, and the crew members start to develop a suspicion of one of their fellow crew members, and they start convincing themselves based on these like little tidbits and rumors that they've heard that this guy is a spy, and he's like out to get them, and he's feeding information to the Germans, and they like almost go really far and like I gets to a point where they like, are you're like, are they gonna kill this guy? Like, and they have nothing to go on. And they finally figure out that this guy has been hiding something. It's more that he is like a disgraced naval captain. Um, and he's not a spy. I thought that was like the most interesting part of the movie because I was like, oh, this is a really interesting study of like how people can quickly turn on each other and like how this environment of like suspicion and fear and isolation can kind of cause these interactions to happen. And then that happens, and then the movie goes back to kind of just being regular slice of life.
Dudes on
And
boats.
yeah, dudes on boats. Yeah, I think this just I could see how people would really love this movie. I think it's just maybe not for me.
Yeah. Yeah, this is very interesting. Yeah, I love with a 10 movie slate because there's just so many movies. It's like there's only going to be a few where we're all like commonly like in love with, whereas like there are going to be a few of them where like I didn't like it as much or Carrie didn't like it as much because I kind of alluded to it. Like I really love this movie. I think it's just so just captivating, especially at the time because like I feel like we talked about this all Quiet on the Western Front. The way they kind of preached the war, the way they were kind of saying like join the war, be a hero, hoorah, hoorah. There's the reality that comes from, oh, you're in the war, you're just sitting around in a ship being miserable, just kind of wasting away the hours. And like you see how that paranoia builds because you just have nothing but your own thoughts and you kind of just want action of some sort because you're just so bored and the mundanity of it that I think is not advertised, obviously, when they're trying to recruit you for shit like this, where, a lot of the war is this boring kind of reflection, depression, just kind of living in this unknowing if this is going to be your last day, but not knowing if you should live it up to your best of your ability because it might be your last day when you really can't because you're on a ship and you really just have each other and you all smell bad and you're all miserable and bored. Like I just think there's something really powerful to that, especially at the time where so many movies are giving that like hoorah. Like we watched, what was the name of it, Chad, on 1943, In Which We Serve, I think it was called.
Yeah.
Which was all just like, you know, yay war, come fight. And it's like I like this as like that kind of counter programming to be like, no, like it sucks. And I love that about this. This kind of makes me feel like in a similar way how we were all on like Grapes of Wrath, where like some of us didn't love it. It does deal with heavy stuff. But I think if you're just tapped into the characters and the situations, like for me, it just very spellbinding. Especially the way it's shot too, just helped emphasize that. Just all the really interesting ways they kind of angled and shot and captured the ship in different directions. But Chad, I'm interested to see what do you think of this one?
Well, kind of first of all, when Carrie was talking about the idea of people turning on their own, like thinking like maybe this is the mole or something like that. It kind of reminded me of watching the reality show we all love, The Traitors, and like the Stanford prison experiment and stuff like that. That's just like just like taking a role and just like turning and really like it can go south really quickly. Ultimately, I feel like I'm more on Carrie's wavelength than Dylan's. Although I will say I find it because I also was like in my head, when watching this, comparing it to Master and Commander. That's a very
Yeah.
apt comparison. But whereas I really loved Master and Commander, I feel like this one, for me, just for some reason, I just couldn't get into the characters as much and didn't really, find the stories that they were trying to tell like ultimately that fascinating. Although, you know, they do like have like a potential spy situation. At one point, they find out that they're hauling explosives and they're trying to figure that out, like the, you know, harrowing nature of that, like, or if they like support that or whatever. I think someone tries to like escape from the boat at one point, and then they get caught, you know. And then they're going off and partying and drinking and stuff like that. So yeah, it is kind of a, like you're talking about, like a slice of life, kind of like living in the moment, you know, like what these, you know, people on, you know, on these, you know, cargo vessels go through. You know, and if it's something that you really love to watch, then I feel like, you know, you can really get into it. But for me, it just like I liked it fine enough, but I did not like love it like on any like real level. And it's weird because um I feel like, you know, the one of the all-time like classic stars of, you know, back in those days was John Wayne. I mean, mostly known for like, you know, big
Westerns.
westerns and
Mhm.
stuff like that. But I feel like every single John Wayne movie I've watched for Picture This, I just haven't liked. Like I didn't like The Alamo, and I didn't like Stagecoach.
Stagecoach.
And
Yeah.
so I don't know. I don't know what it is. Like I don't think it has anything to do with him. I think it's just like the movies that he's in. But maybe I need to watch like some of the like great like westerns he's in, and you know, other than Stagecoach and or in The Alamo. I guess you can count that as a western. Um,
Yeah.
but you know,
Yeah.
we'll
No,
see.
I just think it's very interesting hearing all the opinions because I do think it just depends on because it's not a very entertaining film, and I think that's it too. It's not meant to kind of be entertaining, but I think the fact that it's trying not to be is what makes it intriguing to me. But I can definitely see someone not vibing with this because it is very mundane. It honestly it is boring purposefully in a way, if that makes sense, which I think is very intriguing, but definitely doesn't work for everyone. One thing I also wanted to note just on the cinematography, Greg Toland, this was a rare time where the actual like opening card, like in the credits, it said John Ford and Greg Toland. Like they put the cinematographer on the actual title card too, which was very unheard of, and I feel like we never see nowadays, especially because that work was just so well done. A lot of people loved it, and this actually inspired Orson Welles to hire him for Citizen Kane the very next year,
Wow.
where he also put his name on the title card. It said Orson Welles, Greg Toland. So I just thought that was really cool. I just think it's really cool to see that like some of these movies that are just like more forgotten about early like 1940s or late 1930s movies are like kind of the audition reels for the real hits that they get, like you know, I don't want to necessarily say John Ford himself because he obviously broke out with Grapes of Wrath here, but like he won Best Picture the next year for How Green Was My Valley, so this was kind of like his statement of like, oh, this is a guy to watch, let's put him, you know, give him the award next year, and like this guy with the cinematographer, let's hire him for Citizen Kane, which most people would say is the greatest film ever shot in terms of how it, you know, groundbreaking its cinematography was. So I just think it's really cool that like they were giving the cinematographer just as much credit as the director, which really just goes to show how powerful the cinematography is. Because I just think that was really what kept me in it. Most of it was just looking at all the gorgeous, you know, the way it got foggy, it kind of personifying the war itself, just the darkness and that struggle to emerge from it and find the light. And I think it's really shown in the visuals of this thing. So I just wanted to give it its due.
Yeah.
It's not my favorite of Slate, obviously, because I said earlier there's a movie that was the best thing I ever watched that I had never seen before on Picture This. So I think that'll be hard to top. It might be topped. We have 3 more to go, but I definitely want to give this its merits because I really enjoyed this one. But between this one and Grapes of, I guess we'll get to the rankings. I was going to ask which John Ford you preferred, but I guess we'll wait till rankings to determine, because the other ones might be a little bit more clear cut, but this one we'll have to find out with the rankings. I think I know where we land, but we'll have to find out. And any other thoughts on Long Voyage Home? Oh, well, it was a long voyage home from Oscar night because it didn't win any awards. Very sad journey home for them. Where they only won 0 of the 6. They didn't win any. It was nominated for picture, screenplay, original score, obviously cinematography, black and white, film editing, and special effects. They just had the long voyage. They just had to go all the way back home, empty-handed, into their town. But what about our town, Chad and Kerri? What about this wonderful world of Oz? Is that a town? I guess it's more of a world. I guess Munchkinland would be a town, but what about our town, Chad? Tell us about our town.
Our town. In the
In the
middle of
middle of our state. Yeah.
our town. Our Town, directed by Sam Wood, written by Harry Chandley, Frank Craven, and Thornton Wilder. Cinematography by Burt Glennon. Music by Aaron Copland. Starring William Holden, Martha Scott, Faye Bainter, Tim Davis, Beulah Bondi, Thomas Mitchell, Guy Kibbe, Dix Davis, Stuart Irwin, Frank Craven, and Doro Morandi. Synopsis: Emily Webb, no relation, ponders her existence at death's door after we learn about her small town, based on the 1938 play Our Town by Thornton Wilder.
Yeah. So similarly to how you two were in And Then There Were None, and how a few months ago we had Malcolm, who was in The Man for All Seasons, and then Kelsey and I were in Oliver, and now here we are again, where I played Doc Gibbs in my 8th grade production of Our Town. That's the Thomas Mitchell role. Your mom was chopping wood. What do you think she is? A woman you just hired to do the dishes and that you just get to walk all over? Like I was the old man. So that was kind of fun. I was an old man as well, like you were in
Yeah.
And Then There Were None. So I have a fondness for this play, and this was a play that I feel like is hard to grasp for 8th graders when we did it at the time, kind of understanding what it had to say. But we had a really great director who really helped us kind of see what the beauty of the language was, because it is such a kind of like with Long Voyage Home, kind of a mundanity. It focuses a lot on the mundanity of everyday life, and how maybe the simple joys are the things we have to cherish in life. But it is also very interesting considering that the liberties this film takes is very drastic compared to the play, which we could talk about in a little bit. But I want to hear your opinions on it first, because I believe this is a first time watch for both of you, right? All right. So I want to hear your opinions first on the movie before I like talk about it in relation to the play, if that makes sense. So I guess we'll start with Chad this time. Chad, what do you think of Our Town, the film?
I thought it was interesting. It's like it was kind of weird and meta, where it was like just a narrator talking about the town, but he was like interacting with people in the town. And it's just kind of strange in that way, where it's like, all right, enough of you people. We're going to go on talk about this other stuff. And I don't know, like for a while, it didn't even really feel like there was like that much of a story they were telling. But I feel like what they were doing was they were doing the first part of the Grapes of Wrath that we didn't get to see, where it was like painting what this town is. And then we get a little bit into like the story of like the young romance, and we get to see like Emily Webb die, but then that's not it. And then we get to see like her like in like the after, and then come back to like kind of see her life afterwards, and it gets very like existential and very um contemplative on like the meaning of life. And it goes really big, from like going from like just a story about our town, where it could have just been like sort of like a Peyton
Yeah.
Place
Mm,
kind of a thing, where it was just like a story in this town, and then it's like, well, now it's talking about life and death, and
right.
regret. And she's coming back, and she's like, why don't you smile? And like, why don't you get along with your mom? And I wish I could go back and do all this stuff. And are you saying it's over? Which is really sad and scary to
Yeah.
think about, and just like ponder, like, am I doing everything right? Probably not, but like, could I do things better? Am I forgetting to live in the moment? So I do feel like you're right, like it does have like a lot to say, even though I do feel like at times it also gets like really preachy,
Hmm.
where it's sitting here like, there, and as we all know, there's one Lord that we're supposed to like, bow down to. And just talking about like, the almighty Lord, and just, it just like feels like very like telling you that, like I'm religious to an extent, but like it's one of those things to where it just feels like it's pushing a message at one point too.
Yeah.
You
It's
know,
pushing a very specific like idea of like idealism of suburbia in a way. Like this
mm,
is how the perfect house has to be, with a man, a woman, 2 kids. They're all
yeah,
Protestants. There's a little bit of Catholic, but like this is our town. Like and I think that's purposeful. But you're right. Like there is like that dated element where I think if you were to make a film like this now, it feels like in retrospect it's a little problematic because it's like, no, we have to conserve the old idealism of suburbia. But at the time, again, it's like one of those things where you have to judge time versus present and
If
past, you know?
if they tried to make Our Town now, it would be even more meta. It'd be like
Yeah.
crazy,
Well,
like meta.
it's
And
playing on Broadway right now. They just revived it. Jim Parsons actually is playing the stage manager, the narrator. So,
have you
um,
seen it?
not yet. It like just opened a few weeks ago, the revival on Broadway. So I'm hoping to go see it, but I just think it's a very apropos time that's really
Yeah.
cool that they're bringing it back. Because again, I do think it's the matter of how you present it versus what is on the text. Because I think how you present it really does emphasize what you want the audience to take from it, or the film going audience, I guess. Um, yeah, very interesting. Great takes. I love it. Kerri, what do you think of our town?
Um, I wound up really liking it.
Oh,
I have this thing where if a movie I think ends well, I will forgive a lot of faults in the movie. Um, so it starts off very slow, and I thought the meta stuff was really cool, like how the two mothers are having the conversation. And the narrator's like, "All right, ladies, we're done with you." And they look like directly to the camera, like, and I was like, "Oh, that is really cool for a 1940 movie to do that." And like, I imagine the play probably does that.
Yeah.
Um, I guess you'll probably talk more, Dylan. You are more experienced in the play versus the movie. Um, but I thought that stuff was really cool. And then kind of the turn it takes in the second half. I don't I really liked it. I didn't think it got too preachy. I guess maybe I probably tuned some of the stuff out, but I thought the overall message about like remembering that our lives are short and to try
yeah.
to be present with each other for as much as we can, and like these times that we have, like even these really mundane things, and the whole first half is just the very mundane things in this town, but how these mundane things make up our everyday life and the people that we share them with. One day we're gonna miss them, or not be able to see them every day, or things will change. We'll have different relationships, or not live in the same house anymore.
Mhm.
So I don't know. For me, it really got me. I cried a lot. And,
It's definitely a weepy. It's one of those movies that's like designed to make you grab for the tissues. Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it made me just like remind myself too. I don't know, just try to be more present every day, even though things seem really rushed all the time. These people in this like slow, sleepy town still feel like Emily still feels like she didn't spend enough time like looking at her mother and her brother and laughing with them, and
Mhm.
just sharing moments with them. So
Yeah. No, it's very fitting for this panel that this is the movie we covered here because this was a very direct influence on It's a Wonderful Life, which we've seen, obviously, which we all love. But the idea of like, if you could look at the past or the future, like what would it be? And I love how you have those moments where she's getting to look at the glimpse of a life that is not this idyllic suburban life because she dies in childbirth. So like that's a family without a mother, and that is so contrasting of what that first half is, where there's a mother and a father, and all the kids do the chores and they walk each other home from school and they live across the street and they pick up the milk every morning. Like there is this like routine and mundanity that when it is broken, it helps you reflect on what was there all along type deal. And kind of like what I was saying with Chad, it was like, I think if you were to look at it now, this could be like kind of preachy in terms of just the conservative movement of like, well, this is how families should be, like kind of anti same-sex marriage in a way where it's like, well, look at this is perfect, man, woman, child. But I also think at the time this was not meant to preach those things as well. Whereas now I think someone could use something like this to preach a pretty bad conservative argument. But I think at the time it's more forgiving because really what it is, as you both have said, is just kind of appreciating life and the little things in life, just enjoying what there is, because you never know how long it's going to be, especially with her. You get married, you're excited to have a kid, and then you die in childbirth, you don't even get to meet your child. It's like that sadness that comes. So the differences with the play and the musical, which I think is, or the play and the movie, is very fascinating. So the entire play is without a set. So the whole purpose is that there at a blank stage, and I don't know what the revival is doing, so it might be different. But it's usually a blank canvas, and stage manager comes out as if he is the stage manager of the show. In the script, he is known as the stage manager, and he basically says, "Oh, hello everyone, welcome." And he kind of like builds the town in front of you by saying, "Right here, this is a large butternut tree." He's like describing what you would see, even though there is no set to show it. And I think when I did it in 8th grade, we had a few little set pieces, like we brought on a table or we brought on like a set of stairs, but there was no set because like the whole beauty of it is like you in your mind can build this town from what the stage manager is describing. And the whole stage manager's like opening is like 10 minutes long of him just describing this town and having you imagine it for yourself. And like, this is the Webbs and these are the Gibbs and like, these are the different family members, and he is a doctor. Why don't you tell everyone what you do, doctor? And like that's where all the breaking of the fourth wall comes from. So it is a very interactive experience in that way, and I like how the film stays true to that. But also, in building a town now, there's a little bit of that charm lost of like the beauty of the play is that you are kind of in your own brain kind of designing that for yourself, whereas the movie it shows you what the town is. But I think that's obviously for film what you have to kind of do. And then the biggest change is that in the show, Emily dies. She does not wake up. She does not come back to life. And I think that's also a very big pivot that a lot of people have problems with. But I think it's a very, for this time period and like the story they're trying to show, and especially considering how it influenced It's a Wonderful Life, like I can see why they had the more Hollywood ending of she's gonna wake up after realizing what she's missing out on and appreciate her life going forward. It is sappy, but I do think at a time where we're going into war, like I think this is not the right movie to be like, and then she died. How sad, because I believe when I did the play, the play ended with Emily standing at her gravestone, the ghost of Emily, and George crying at her grave, and that's how it ends. And it's like, oh, it sucks and it hurts your heart, it rips your heart out. But I don't really mind the Hollywood ending as much here. I thought it was a little sappy, but I think it's the right ending for this specific movie. But yeah, all the breaking of the fourth wall stuff is straight out of the play. I thought it was very interesting how they translated it to the screen, because it is very hard to convey. But you're right, Kerri. It's like a very interesting, for the time, very cool change of pace and how a story is delivered. Because even nowadays with narration, you hear the narration. You don't see a guy literally break and tell you, by the way. And I feel like the only person really doing that a lot nowadays is like Wes Anderson. We see that a lot with his movies, but otherwise, like I feel like that breaking of the fourth wall is not necessarily the norm. But yeah, I'm glad you guys at least thought this was interesting, because it is not very well restored. I'm sure you guys watched a really shitty version of it. I don't know if you found a better version, but the restoration, like this is a movie that probably could use like a Criterion to restore it up, give a little context as to how like this was what suburbia was, but also noting how like nowadays we've grown past just these really formal, conventions and stereotypes, but also maybe including like the stage version as like a pro shot on that or something. Like I think that'd be really cool, like Criterion, because like this is due for a restoration, because it is really well done. And I think the stuff with her as like this angel or this like ghostly figure, I think if you were to restore this film, I think it would be even cooler looking too, because it does take those stylistic swings that you don't get from the stage show, because it's supposed to be so barren, because it's supposed to be about you kind of filling it in for your own imagination. But I don't know if you guys have anything else to add now that I've kind of given the differences between stage and film. Chad, did you get as emotional as Kerri and I for this one?
I mean, I think I got like emotional like on the very surface. Like I didn't cry, but like I definitely started to kind of like imagine like, myself like living in the moment and stuff like that. So, it's one of those. But, then again, I cried until I couldn't breathe when I watched Can You Ever Forgive Me with Melissa McCarthy. So,
Hmm.
you know, things hit people differently in different
Right.
ways.
Yeah, because I was crying because I also had the context of the play. So I was wondering just from you two, like does this hit the same for the film? And it sounds like for some it does, for some it doesn't. But yeah, it was hard to judge it, because I'm like, when Thomas Mitchell's doing his lines, I'm doing my lines in my head. I'm like, oh, I remember the scene. Like, but I can't really tap into it differently because I have that experience of just firsthand doing it. We actually in our pre-show before the show started, we played the song, our house is a very, very, very white house. Like that was our pre-show music as the audience was settling in. So I don't know. It's just like this brings back memories of 8th grade doing the show. But even then, I don't know if it's as good as I think it is because I have the context. But it sounds like it's at least enjoyable for all of us, which is
Yeah,
good.
the performance sells it. Emily Webb, she's good.
Yeah, for sure. Martha Scott. Any other thoughts on our town, the film? Not your town in Maryland or my town in Jersey. But any other thoughts?
No.
No. Cool. Our town also goose egg, 0 wins. These films can't catch a break.
Wow.
0 wins for 6 nominees. Nominated for picture, nominated for actress for Martha Scott as Emily Webb. Best original score, that score is great. Best scoring, because I guess those are two different things. Best sound recording and best art direction, black and white. But you know what? A town I really really like, especially for their food, especially for
Philadelphia.
their cheesesteaks. Yeah, the cream cheese and oh my gosh. Love Philadelphia. History, Ben Franklin. There you go. Chad, tell us about the Philadelphia story.
The Philadelphia Story, directed by George Cukor, written by Donald Ogden Stewart, cinematography by Joseph Rutenberg, music by Franz Waxman, starring Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, James Stewart, Ruth Hussey, John Howard, Roland Young, John Halliday, Mary Nash, Virginia Weidler, Henry Daniell, another one of him, and Lionel Pape. Synopsis: Tracy Lord must decide between three men as her wedding looms near. Based on the 1939 play The Philadelphia Story by Philip Barry, which starred Katharine Hepburn, and then she basically kind of became like a producer of this movie to like cast this thing and stuff like that, which I found that very fascinating.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, Katharine Hepburn, the cast, like this, I think on paper, this is maybe one of the best trios of classic cinema in terms
Yeah.
of just like three of the greats. You have Cary Grant, who's one of the most charming people ever, Jimmy Stewart, who's just one of the most endearing people ever, and then Katharine Hepburn, who's just a tour de force. So I was just very excited to go into this. Did you had seen this before, right? This was a
Mhm.
rewatch for you too? Okay, so this is a first watch for me. So I'm curious to hear you guys for your either second or third or how many ever times experience with this, what you guys thought. We'll start with Carrie this time. Carrie, what'd you think of the Philadelphia Story on rewatch?
Okay. I love this movie. Like I really, really love this movie. Um, and there are things in it that I can find fault with, and I totally understand if someone watches this movie and doesn't like it, because there are things about it that I'm like that's a 1940s thing, and like I could really do without that. But overall, like I think just the chemistry between Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, and then Katharine Hepburn and James Stewart, and even between James Stewart and Cary Grant, um, is just so phenomenal. I think the script, or I guess the play as well, is so incredibly like witty and just well written, and the characters are like pretty fully fleshed out. I don't know, it's just how it's acted. I don't know. This is one, and I guess partly because it is a rewatch, I just have such a soft spot for it. Like I think it's perfectly funny. I love every time I watch it, I'm like, "Oh yeah, who does she end up with again?" And that's not like the main for me, that's not even like the main part of the story though. A
Right.
lot of it is like Tracy discovering herself and who she
Yeah.
is and who she wants to be, and that like how her relationships play into that is definitely a factor. Um I don't know, and just things I picked up on a rewatch, like how um Cary Grant tells her at the pool scene, he tells her all these things that are insulting to her and are meant to be kind of insulting and to her about herself. And then her fiance, I think his name is George,
Mhm.
um, comes in and tells her those same things, but like in a nice way. And then I think that's where she realizes like she doesn't really want to be with him, because she thinks like Cary Grant says like, "Oh, you're this goddess and you can never find fault with anyone. And, you're just so high up on this pedestal." And then George kind of says those same things. He says them in a nice way, but she realizes he thinks the same about her, but isn't really, I guess, honest about it. And
Yeah.
then James Stewart kind of says up, like when they have their scene, um, where they're both drunk, he kind of says the opposite things about her. And I don't know, like, part of it, I was like, I think she winds up with Cary Grant because he maybe sees for her for who she truly is and still loves her and is still willing to love her as she maybe works on herself. I don't know. I feel like I want to watch this movie again and again just to like figure out the dynamics and the interactions. And maybe I'm just reading too much into things.
Hmm.
Um, but overall, like this is just like I just love watching this movie.
Nice. Yeah, I do agree with you with like I want to watch this again because this is only my first watch, and I think a lot of like the resolutions I feel like on rewatch might make a little bit clearer sense because it was a very out of left field thing for me at the end when she does choose Cary Grant because of all the things he said about her negatively. And I don't necessarily know if that's the right ending, but it is kind of that question with like Kitty Foyle too. It's like what is the right choice versus what is the choice that the movie's going to present us with anyway? Because it's not up to us, the audience, what the right choice is, but I also think there's a way the film is leading to make you believe that it is Jimmy Stewart that she's going to end up with, also because he's the one who wins the Oscar for it. He has a little bit more screen time, but I do ultimately like how it is still her decision in a similar way that Kitty Foyle's is as well, and how she kind of has this agency. But Chad, I would like to hear your thoughts on this as a rewatch for you.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear like Carrie start out with it because she does love it like more than I do because she's like I think she might have seen it before I did. No? Okay. Well, we watched it, like, for the first time together, and I remember she really liked it, and I was like, "I don't know about this one." Like, this is, like, a classic, like, romantic comedy that people seem to really, like, put on a pedestal, it feels like at least, and so I was just like, when I first watched it, I was like, "I don't really get it." And then but I feel like it has had sort of a similar trajectory for me that The Apartment did, where at first I was like with The Apartment, I was like, "Why do people think this is a comedy? This isn't even really that funny." And then upon rewatch, I'm like, "Oh, okay, I get it." The comedy is a little bit subtler, but I think it really works. And like if you get into the groove of the Philadelphia story, it's really like extremely witty, like Carrie was saying, and that it's just really really funny. Like there's just so many like great lines and situations, and just Jimmy Stewart is just being so funny. Um, in the movie, like when they're in the library and he's like, where's the bathroom or whatever he's saying. Um, you know, uh, Great like use of language and stuff. I think Carrie hit like a really good note too about the Tracy, like, meeting these different guys and just like trying to figure out like who, she would want to end up with, if she even wants to marry George, and is she just doing it for because he meets this like criteria that she set for herself. But then like I think that's brilliant because it's like, yeah, I mean it's a little bit, weird that because, Dexter like pushes her or whatever in the very beginning, that you're just like, oh, okay. So obviously, screw that guy. But then like towards like through the middle of the film, you start to realize that he's the one that like knows her and like just really could like help her figure herself out and stuff. And I feel like that's what like great relationships, do a lot of the times. It's like they're not perfect and neither person in it is perfect, but they can like help each other like figure each other out and stuff like that. So I think that's maybe why they ultimately made that decision of her to go with Dexter. Uh, and of course, because you're thinking maybe she might go with Mike, but Mike, is likes the photographer, and then she also is infatuated with him, and then of course, like we find out that George is just very kind of uppity and is just like very, not like he's very judgmental. Like he come like Carrie was talking about, he comes across as nice, but it's like kind of fake. Where it's
Mhm.
like Dexter's more real. He's gonna tell it like it is, and it might seem rude, but there's a bit of truth to everything that he says, and he
Mhm.
sees a lot of stuff that goes on, um, and stuff like that. But ultimately, yeah, I really like the I don't know. It's just weird, like the line delivery and the inflections all these actors have. Like Cary Grant is so charming, and I just like love like every line he delivers, and same with
Mhm.
Katharine Hepburn. Like, I was trying to, like, figure out if I liked her performance at all at first, and then I was like, I'm actually really digging like, there's certain
Yeah.
lines that she says where she goes, "Terribly," and stuff like that, and then, when she goes, "Uncle Willie," and I'm just like,
Mhm.
I don't know, I just, like, really love the lines that she does, and then, like, I
Yeah.
was talking about James Stewart, where he just has he has the same James Stewart voice, but, like, he's just so witty and just, like, so funny, and, like, when he gets drunk, it's really funny, and he, like, yells at the phone at one point, it's like, "Not now!" Stuff like that. I don't know, it's just, like, so well, like, written and just I don't know, such a really fantastic, like, romantic comedy. Like, it took me just a few watches to really even figure out if I liked it, and then I think I'm on the verge of loving it. It's like it's so weird sometimes the where my relationship with certain films where I go like I could start out like not really liking something and then go like it just has to grow on me,
Yeah. Yeah.
or
I'm
maybe
glad.
I grow with the film.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I had the same experience you did on your first watch, Chad, where I finished this knowing this was like held in a very high esteem and that people loved it, and I knew Kerri loved it too because I know part of the reason she wanted to be on this panel was because of that. And I was very disappointed because I wasn't at that level with it. I was like, that was fun. Like I enjoyed some of the banter. I love that second half, especially like once they start drinking, it amps up a little bit for me. But I was like, I was never fully in it, and I do wish I could have been. But hearing that you've kind of come around to it, it's like we have someone who loved it the first time and loves it even more. Someone who didn't love it loves it now, and someone who's watched it once and doesn't love it. Like I think it's gonna be cool to like hopefully get on that level. And if we did have like 2 or 3 months to prep each of these episodes, I would have watched this twice or three times. But I do hope in the future I can watch this again and get a little bit more out of it, having heard your experiences because it is very well written and the characters are great and the acting is great. That much I know. It's more so like the just different relationship nuances and the different characterizations and who's best for who. And like Cary Grant, he says things honestly, but he does say things in a certain way. But also James Stewart, he sees the very face value stuff. Like she's hot and she's her career, she's a great poet. And it's like that's great. And she's like, wow, someone recognizes me for these things, but it's also like, but you don't know me still. You know these things about me that I've done, or you know what I look like, these surface level things. So I understand why it's not him that she ends up with. I think the most interesting element of the story is actually the involvement of the press in general, just the whole idea of like, the press has dirt on you, so instead we're going to invite you to cover our wedding to kind of clear our name because you've done something wrong, and just showing kind of this interesting display of class in that way, which I think is very fascinating. The way the press and the rich and the way rich can get away with certain things in the media, but then also when the media kind of puts them on blast, and kind of exposes that truth. I think the father in this is despicable at times. The fact that he like blames Katharine Hepburn, her behavior for his own infidelity, stuff like that, which is a really interesting commentary just on wealth and gender in a way too, where it's like, well, I can don't do no wrong. I'm a man. It's your fault, my young impressionable daughter for screwing this up. Like I think that's what's most interesting for me is the press and the class in interesting conversations rather than the actual romance, which I still don't know who I like best for her. It's kind of the same thing with Kitty Foyle, whereas I hope she chooses herself at the end. But if you are Team Cary Grant, that final pivot where like she kind of like looks, she's like, "Wait, what? We're getting married?" Like I that's so classic rom com. Like I did love that, even though I wasn't like rooting for her to get with him. I love the way they kind of staged that and went about doing that final scene. I thought that was a really charming way to end this story. To where hopefully when I watch it again, I'll love it even more. But Carrie, I got a reaction out of you when I was talking about the father and the infidelity.
Yeah, I didn't remember that from my first watch of it, and I remember rewatching that scene, and I was like, "What the like? Why is this here?" And one, it
Yeah.
has nothing to do with the rest of the movie, and it's just like blatantly horrible. And then later, and Chad and I were talking about this, I think this morning or yesterday, she like apologizes to him, and she's like, "I'm sorry, I'm such a disappointment to you." And he's like, "I never said that. I would never say that." And I was like, why are you gaslighting her? Like,
Bitch, we have the receipts. We can rewind. Like I have this on streaming.
She literally said that out loud. Stop gaslighting her.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Um,
yeah, that is very interesting. And one last thing, actually I forgot my thought. Wait, it's coming
Oh,
back.
sorry.
No, it's not. It's gone. Chad,
well,
go ahead.
real
You had a
quick,
thought.
yeah, real quick. It's like kind of goes into the idea of divorce. Like that's the big scandal is that he well not divorce but he cheated or whatever, and like that the infidelity was like the big scandal for that family. But also just real quick, and then Dylan, you can say your thought. I wanted to touch on that. I thought Virginia Weidler as Dinah was fantastic. I love
Yeah.
the little sister. That the moment when she's putting on the act and she shows
Yeah.
up and in like the dress or whatever, and she's like, "Hello," and she's like, "I'm gonna go play the piano because I can." It kind of like makes me wonder if like Dylan was like that when he was a little kid, when people come over and he's like, "Welcome to our home. I'm gonna go play the piano," and then rushes over to show off on the piano.
I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I will neither confirm nor deny. Sorry, I'm starting over my words. We're hitting that 11 o'clock number here as we rear into our final film. But I did remember what I was going to say though about the father and why they included it. It might just be to show that like all these men are really projecting their insecurities on her in a way, which I think can kind of make it more nuanced in the love triangle aspect too. The idea of her fiance and what he projects onto her, her ex-husband and what he projects, and even James Stewart as like this guy who's like just trying to get it out of all his just like weird drunk sexual urges as well, what he projects on her and then the stuff he puts on her because now she has to deal with that element as well. Like I think that's kind of something to be said, which also makes this an interesting feminist piece as well. Just this woman who has it together and who's kind of taking all these burdens from all these men, including her own father. I think that's a kind of interesting way to look at it. But I agree, it doesn't make him a savory character though, and it makes it very cringy. But I
Yeah,
guess it's intentionally so. But I am. This is like one of those placeholders where like wherever I put it in the ranking, it's gonna be like with the knowledge of what Chad said with like the apartment, where like this will grow up. Like I know I'm gonna get more of this in a second watch. Just the first time, I think also because it's so hyped up. This was like one of those movies that I was really after it finished, I was like, did I watch it wrong? Did I like not get like why? But now I'm like, okay, so it might take a little time to like fully come around. Especially because it's comedy. Comedy's subjective. But I do think the comedy is at least what I walked away from enjoying the most. So Chad.
yeah. Just real quick, I just remembered something because I remember the whole discussion that we had with Dan Skip Allen on our 1980 episode where we talked about ordinary people, and it
Hmm.
was like these like well-off people are having like problems, and like I remember like he was like basically saying like they're so rich, like how can they have like so many problems, like poor people have issues. And I just love how also like Philadelphia stories about like a very wealthy family, and yet she kind of like more kind of idolizes the lower class because maybe they feel more real or something like that to her. And so and then also we have issues with the wealthy family that they just have to deal with issues. They're a little bit different, but they're still issues. And I just found that like the whole class aspect pretty interesting in the film as well.
Yeah, just such a very interesting, just yeah, very interesting dynamic, very interesting play with class and gender and all that stuff. So, any other thoughts on the Philadelphia story? No? Cool. Philadelphia Story does win 2 Oscars. It wins. It's not going home empty-handed. It wins 2 out of 6 Academy Awards. It wins Best Actor for James Stewart. This is his only win for Best Actor of his whole
Wow.
career. I do think this was kind of making up for 39 the year before for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. That's just my thinking. But well deserved. And also wins for Best Screenplay. It's also nominated for Best Picture, Best Director for George Cukor, Best Actress for Katharine Hepburn, and Best Supporting Actress for Ruth Hussey. Ruth, it's a woman. Her name starts with an R. You know what other woman's name starts with an R? And we see that R on
Rachel?
everything. And we see it on the
Oh,
diary. We see it everywhere. What were you gonna say?
I said Rachel.
Rachel. Close, close. We covered Rachel a few months ago, but we're actually gonna be talking about Rebecca. Rebecca, my mother. Not this movie's not about my mother, but my mom's name is Rebecca. So shout out, mom. Chad, tell us about the film Rebecca, directed by Hitch. He's back.
Sure. Rebecca, directed by The Hitch or Alfred Hitchcock, written by Robert E. Sherwood, Joan Harrison, Philip McDonald, and Michael Hogan, Cinematography by George Barnes. Music by Franz Waxman, starring Laurence Olivier, Joan Fontaine, George Sanders, Judith Anderson, Nigel Bruce, Reginald Denny, C. Aubrey Smith, Gladys Cooper, and Florence Bates. Synopsis: a nameless woman marries into a wealthy family whose recently deceased matriarch's shadow looms large over the mansion called Manderley, based on Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And maybe if they remade this one day, it would just be called Becky or something.
They
Actually,
actually remade it in like
Is it called
2020
Becky?
or something. Yeah.
is it
Oh.
called Becky? No, okay.
No, it's called Rebecca.
Yeah, it was Army Hammer and Lily James, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So a few years
Weird.
ago. Yeah, Army plays he doesn't play, neither of them play Rebecca, because Rebecca's not a character. That was a big shock for me. I was gonna make a joke, but that Army Hammer didn't play Rebecca, but no one plays Rebecca, and that was a big shock for me. I'd never seen this one. I was like,
Oh.
wait, there's no Rebecca. Rebecca's not in this. I don't know. I didn't know what to expect for this one, but you guys had seen this one before as well, right?
Yeah.
All right, so another one back to back where I hadn't seen it. You guys had. I'll start with this one because I hadn't seen it, and I don't know what the like, common perception is. Because again, this one, along with I threw my pen. Along with Foyle Correspondent, doesn't feel like one of Hitchcock's like marquee films, which is interesting because this is the one that wins Best Picture. You know, this is the one that is his most award worthy. Yet we talk about Psycho, we talk about North by Northwest, we talk about Vertigo and Rear Window and The Birds. You know, all those films. But I think there's a reason, because this is very it has that Hitchcock edge to it, but it does feel much less like horror-ish, I think, than some of those. Like there is a mystery and there is a thriller there, but it is just kind of this really deep, it is haunting, I guess. Yeah, love story. Because I was trying to talk myself out of the horror of it, but I expected it to be a lot more like scary, like in the way that Psycho is. But it was much more restrained and elegant, that I didn't expect from Hitchcock. I expected it to be like quick and energetic and thrilling, like Foreign Correspondent. But it really takes its time. It's really elegant. You know, I love just the production design of this mansion. You know, this woman who, you know, is kind of an outsider and feels like she doesn't belong, and you get this really interesting relationship with this maid who very clearly was not just a friend of Rebecca's, but clearly had a little bit something else going on. You know, she literally I think she like smells her like underwear as she holds it to like this woman's face. I don't even think, do we ever hear this woman's name, her first name, or
Andrew.
is okay?
Oh, you mean the main character?
Yeah.
No.
Nope.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's also very interesting.
Her character's name is like the second Mrs. De Winter.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting choice because it shows that she doesn't have her own kind of identity here. She's always in the shadow of something else. I don't know. I thought this was really good. I was going into it being like, why don't people talk about this? And I get why afterwards, because it doesn't have those like moments that like a lot of those other films do, like Psycho. You can pull out the shower scene. Like it doesn't have all that, but it is really top to bottom, really, really solid throughout. Like I was very engrossed. I like how it's a little bit of a mystery, and then we get the answer, and we still get a mystery on top of that at the end. Kind of like it takes a third act almost to a fourth act pivot of like, now you thought you knew this, now here's another element to the story. So yeah, I just really, really enjoyed this. This was just like the most like just solid watch. Like I'm not leaving it saying this is my new favorite Hitchcock, but I also very happy that it did win, because I think it is a very good film. So I'll let you guys talk a little bit more about it before we dive into a few more details. But Chad, what did you think of Rebecca, having seen it before? You guys had seen this before, so what did you think of this on rewatch?
Yeah, I kind of love Rebecca. I think this is a very, like, even though it won Best Picture, it does kind of feel like one of those like underrated Hitchcocks or whatever, or at least one of those that just like maybe not underrated, but just like under talked about. It kind of feels like a Notorious, where it's like Notorious might be one of his best movies, and yet no one really talks about it on the same level as like a Psycho, like you talk, or like a Rope or Rear Window or whatever. But yeah, I think Rebecca is phenomenal. I mean, there's a whole behind the scenes story about him fighting with the producer Selznick.
Oh
Like
yeah,
that's like a whole thing, which is kind of fascinating. Like fighting over that, because it's an adaptation of a book and stuff like that. And I think, I don't know. I don't even know if it's really a negative, but my only note that I wrote that was kind of like this would have been maybe a little bit more interesting, is if they had gone as far as making Maxim actually responsible for Rebecca's death, rather than it being an accident. And the
Yeah.
reason for that, it was a whole like production code type of thing where they were like,
Oh, they couldn't
yeah,
show
like,
him murdering her.
well, they didn't want to. They thought like having and like we're seeing like with Breaking Bad and stuff like that, having like a very complex character that an anti-hero basically, where Maxim is culpable in the murder, but then gets away with it and falls in love, isn't happy, or is maybe gets to find happiness at the end. They just weren't like into that. They were like, well,
Mm,
you can't have a murderer win at
yeah.
the end.
Yeah, and I think because they don't want to commit to that, it almost becomes a little too plotty at the end because it's like he watched her fall and die, but he covered up the body. But
Yeah,
turns out there might have been motive because she was pregnant, but really she wasn't pregnant. She had cancer. Like it almost feels like it's jumping through a little too many hoops at the end. I agree. I think the end it's interesting because it keeps it going, and you're like, oh, I didn't expect all this, but it also does feel excess. It feels a little extra in a way.
yeah, I can definitely understand that, but for the positives, and the reason why I love it is because it's a haunted house film without actually showing any ghosts.
Right.
But the reason why this is almost like scarier than like showing like a cheesy ghost, like Carrie and I watched The Uninvited, which we were talking about. This kind of reminds us of The Uninvited. I feel like The Uninvited does actually show a ghost at some point, but this is ultimately kind of scarier than that because it's all about like the imprint that this woman left on this house. Like you're talking about like all the monogram stuff, but like the memories that she put in, Mrs. Danvers and how problematic she is, but also just like this big presence that this one woman is like struggling to fulfill. And I like to see how at first she was so overwhelmed and just kind of like sad and she was scared, like, "Oh, I can't do all the things that this woman did." And then when she starts to take kind of like a charge and goes, "I'm Mrs. De Winter now," kind of a thing, I thought was like really cool. Um, and ultimately, I thought Joan Fontaine really, really nailed that, kind of
Hmm.
transition and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just Hitch being Hitch, like basically kind of, yeah, making this like feel lived in. Like Manderley feels like there was a whole other life with this woman who's now gone, and yet you still feel like the ghost of her there, even though you don't see it, you don't hear it, but you know seeing like this room, and you almost feel like Rebecca's ghost could pop out at any time. And there's one moment where nameless woman is in a room, and it's like Rebecca's old room or something like that, and you feel like she could pop out, and then Mrs. Danvers just pops in, and it's kind of a little bit of a jump scare.
Yeah.
um and then like when it gets to like the really like crazy stuff about like when you know really crazy stuff when she's trying to like get nameless woman to commit suicide and all that stuff, so just like the tension and all of that, and the atmosphere is like really just well done and well executed.
There you go.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those like you vibe with it, you feel the movie, and like I really liked the story, that we go on like throughout
Yeah.
and stuff. And I feel like it does maybe get a little bit jumbled there towards the end, but I feel like it's a necessary part of the conclusion of it too, and it gets really interesting when you start to learn about the history of like what happened to Rebecca. So
Mhm. Cool. Yeah, Carrie, what are your thoughts on Rebecca?
I really love this movie. I don't know if it's my favorite Hitchcock. It might be. I'd have to think through all of them.
Nice.
But I really love this story. I think it's a very interesting mystery while not like letting on at first that it's a mystery, because at first everything seems very straightforward. Like, oh, Rebecca died sailing and it was an accident, and now her husband is trying to move on with our main character. And then it slowly turns into more of a mystery and more of, like you guys said, a haunting without an actual ghost being present, which is really cool. Um, And I like all the twists and turns it takes throughout the movie. Like I think it's I I'm able to like kind of stay on board with them. I think it's kind of fun like how many twists happens and it keep like once you have everything figured, you think you have everything figured out, like something else
Hmm.
happens. Um and I really think oh, what's her name? Joan Fontaine, she does just such a great, I think her acting performance is just fantastic in this movie. She just does this perfect job of like seeming very naive and innocent at first and very insecure in this new place, and then developing slowly into her own towards the end of the movie. As she kind of does gain her identity, she figures out that her husband does actually really love her for her, and does not want her to be a clone copy of Rebecca, who it turns out that he actually hated. Um, and I think generally she just like kind of gains the confidence throughout the movie, like of being able like tell off Mrs. Danvers by the end and um, assert herself. Oh my gosh, sorry.
It's okay. It's been a 3-hour podcast. You're good. You're good.
Oh gosh, I'm trying to think of
George
I
Sanders is also great in it.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and he kind of comes in late. Like he's in it a little bit in the beginning, but like he really at that last act is his. He's the one who's really stirring the pot and making everything dramatic. Yeah, I think the reason it didn't feel like a horror film for me is because I expected it to go there because it sets itself up to feel like it could be, like you were saying, Chad, where that jump scare is coming or a ghost is going to pop out. But I think the fact that you don't have a ghost makes it a much more fascinating ghost story in general, because like it does kind of leave that like missing aura rather than finding this personified thing. And I do agree, like it is still thrilling, and I think it would still be a horror film in some respects too, because there is that overlying ghost and tension and horror, even if it's not a conventional horror like you think of when you think of like Psycho. So yeah, it was definitely interesting just hearing you guys talk about it, because I'm like, yeah, no, like it is at least a thriller, and it could be a horror film depending on if you look at it a certain way. And depending on what the resolutions are, like if he is this mass murderer type guy, like serial killer or whatever, I think it gets even more horror territory. But I do also like with the code what they still were able to find from it. So yeah, I definitely want to watch this again now, kind of knowing where it ends up, to just kind of like pick up on the little things too, and just kind of see those shades of like, oh, so he didn't really like Rebecca, which like is something you might pick up on early. I didn't. I'm a little naive in that way, but like I just think it's very interesting to see all the reveals and how that kind of shapes what came before.
And Mrs. Danvers is kind of like one of the great tragic villains
Hmm.
of cinema.
Yeah, because she also has motive. You understand where she's coming from. You can tell there's a longing and a loss. And when she makes her dress in that dress, part of you is wondering if she's doing it to humiliate this new girl, and part of you is wondering if she's just trying to conjure up this thing that she's lost, and maybe she's
True.
going to come out in this dress and this is going to be the next Rebecca, and she's going to find this piece of her that's been missing. Maybe it's not to humiliate her, maybe it's to help satisfy what's been gone, but then it ends up being, nope, you're not her, and then it becomes a humiliation, which I think is cool because like you understand her motives 100% of the way through,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. Now that we've kind of talked about this and Foreign Correspondent, like Kerri said, it might be her favorite Hitchcock. Chad, where is this for you for Hitchcock? Is this one of his your number one or two or top few?
Ah, it's so hard to tell because like I haven't even seen like a lot of Hitchcock because he's got so many movies.
Right.
Like I haven't seen Rope, I haven't
Mhm.
seen North by Northwest. So there's like a few different ones that are like really popular of his that I haven't seen, but I have seen like Rear Window and Psycho and Notorious and
Vertigo.
Vertigo. Um, but yeah, I'd probably say this is at least top 5. But yeah, I could see, yeah, where Carrie's coming from, where it could actually be my number one. Because I like the sneaky ones.
Nice.
I like the ones that like aren't the ones that are the most talked about. Where I'm like, whoa, this is a masterpiece. Like Notorious is one of those.
Right. Yeah, I haven't seen Notorious, so I gotta check that out. Yeah, I think I'm somewhere in between you two, where like it's definitely not my favorite, but like I do like the kind of like you said, Chad, like the unconventional, the ones that aren't as discussed, like those hidden gems, if you will. Yeah, I gotta sit with it. I'm not 100% sure yet. I do think though, as basic as it is, I'm still always gonna be a Psycho guy and a Vertigo guy. Like those two for me are hard to top, but it's also like, I've been with those films longer. I've studied those films further. So like I think if I were to rewatch this one would definitely grow for me. But yeah, Rebecca, it's a
I
hit. It's a hit. There's a reason it won.
I also think like Rear Window might be my number one. I don't know. I need to do
That's a
like
good one too.
a big Hitchcock like rewatch of like everything and fill in some of the blind spots and then do a ranking. So maybe I'll do that one day.
Yeah, it's definitely one that would take a while because of all his silent films. But hey, if you're on for the task, I will join you, my friend. If I can get the time too, that'd be a fun thing, a project to work on. But any last thoughts on Rebecca before we close out this 10 film slate?
Beautifully filmed.
Cool. Yeah, there you go. And it does get an award for being beautifully filmed. It wins 2 awards out of 11. 11 nominations. It does win picture and it does win cinematography for black and white. It's also nominated for Best Director for Alfred Hitchcock, Best Actor for Laurence Olivier, Best Actress for Joan Fontaine, Best Supporting Actress for Judith Anderson, Best Screenplay, Best Original Score, Best Art Direction, Black and White, Best Film Editing, and Best Special Effects. It gets nominated for pretty much everything under the sun that it can, except for George Sanders, got snubbed. But that is it for Rebecca. That is it for our slate. We have managed to do it in under 3 hours, which is impressive, making good time, but we still got some business to attend to. And we got to rank these films, which for me was very difficult. I think like my bottom two were safe, my top two were safe, and like everything in between was kind of jumbled up. Like I didn't really know where to, sort it all out. But we'll have to find out after the fact how all of ours shook out. Kerri, you're our guest. I'll let you begin. What is going to be your number 10?
Oh man, I feel like this is gonna be all over the place for all of us. My number 10 is All This in Heaven Too.
All right. Chad, what is your number 10?
My number 10 is also All This in Heaven Too.
All right. Well, I'm going to break the trend for a bit. My 10 is actually, sorry to my hat, Kitty Foyle is my number 10. All right. Kerri, what is your number 9?
The Long Voyage Home.
This is going to be a very different ranking for all of us. Chad, what is your number? No, this is awesome. Chad, what's your number 9?
The Long Voyage Home.
Well, I guess that's not winning. It's okay. It's okay. All right. My number 9 is The Letter. The Letter. Kerri, what is your number 8?
Foreign Correspondent.
All right. Chad, what is your number 8?
And this is where I break with Kerri. It's Our Town.
Okay. And my number 8 is The Grapes of Wrath is my number 8. So Kerri, what is your number 7?
The Grapes of Wrath.
All right. So there we go. We're
Yeah.
on track with one another now. Chad, what is your number 7?
Foreign Correspondent.
All right. And my number 7, All This in Heaven Too. So it wasn't that far off.
Yeah.
Far off. All right. Kerri, what's your number 6?
The Letter.
The Letter. Chad, what is your number 6?
The Grapes of Wrath.
All right. So Grapes of Wrath and All This in Heaven Too have all been selected. My number 6, this might be controversial, but I have The Philadelphia Story at number 6. Kerri, what is your number 5?
Our Town.
All right. Chad, what is your number 5?
The Letter.
All right. And my 5 is also Our Town, Kerri. So we're moving on now. Kerri, to your number 4. What is your number 4?
Kitty Foyle.
Chad, what is your number 4?
And this is where it gets into ones that I love. So these top 4 I freaking love. And I'm just like still trying to figure out where to rank things. But based on our discussion, I think I will rank Kitty Foyle at number 4.
All right. Kitty Foyle at number 4. And my number 4 is Foreign Correspondent. A little higher than you both had it, but now it's my number 4. What is your number 3, Kerri?
Okay, my number 3, I love my top 3 like equally, and I've been sitting here rearranging my top 3 this whole time. I'm gonna go with what I originally had, just because I couldn't think about it anymore. The Great Dictator.
Nice. Chad, what's your number 3?
Also The Great Dictator.
All right. And my number 3 is not that. It is actually one from much earlier on your list. It's your number 9, which is The Long Voyage Home, is my number 3. All right. Now we get into our top 2s. I think I know what our winner is going to be based on this discussion. But Kerri, what is your number 2?
Rebecca.
All right. And Chad, what is your number 2?
I'm going to make this interesting. My number 2 is The Philadelphia Story.
All right. You actually didn't make it interesting. You made it more easy to pick our number one, but it is a more interesting number one. Number two for me is Rebecca, which means Kerri, your number one is,
The Philadelphia Story.
and Chad's number one is,
Rebecca.
and my number one is The Great Dictator. But with that, with a 2-1-2, Rebecca easily clears as our number one amongst all of us. So one where we actually agree with the Academy. And Rebecca is our number one overall, coming in at number two for me, two for Kerri, and one for Chad. Our runner-up would have been The Great Dictator at 3-3-1, and our third place Philadelphia Story at 2-1-6. So very, very fun. Ranking those there, but Rebecca is taking the cake. It got a double win, double whammy. Best picture at the Oscars and best picture at Picture This. Now, the even more difficult task now is deciding acting prizes for these, because these are stacked slates, but there are also some heavy hitters that I'm sure we all are chomping at the bit to get on our own list. So I'm just going to pull up the list so I know the right order. I believe, Chad, you are first for best actor, correct? Yes, you are. So, Chad, you're going to pick your best actor. Who is your best actor?
All right, this was actually pretty easy, even though there are quite a few actors, especially from one movie. There's a good amount, but I'm going to go with, I think, the all-time performance of the slate, Charlie Chaplin from The Great Dictator.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was easy. It was an easy choice for this one. He plays two roles. He plays them so distinctly, and then he has to have them both mimic each other. And like shows like when he's the Jewish barber, and then he's going to the Jewish barber, like trying to impersonate the dictator, and how bad he is at it. It just shows he just knows how to create two distinct characters and like play them in a movie and just like make it like something that is so believable. And the fact that he's just so funny in everything he does. I mean, going from like a lot of the earlier Chaplin films, just how funny he is, his physicality, and just like the way he knows how to do just like these funny little gags, like the placement of the coin and facial expressions and stuff like that. And then his like interpretive dance where he's hitting the ball with his butt and stuff, and it's just like so funny. And then of course that great speech at the end that he just like nails. It just I feel like we were probably all fighting to get this one, but fortunately
it was my number one. Yeah. Yeah. It was your number one too, Kerri? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it has the most going on as well. It just has the most, from line deliveries to physicality to just emotional ranges as well, because there are some emotional sequences despite the parody and satire. So yeah, I think this is the right pick for number one. I am up next, and you know what? There's not like a very glaring other performance that I'm like, that is the one. It was Charlie Chaplin and then a bunch of other ones fighting for it. But I think the one that I think elevated their film the most in terms of just surprise, and the one that I left being like, wow, that is like a really solid performance. I know we've probably awarded him before for All About Eve, but I'm going to do it again here. George Sanders for Rebecca is going to be my pick. I think also because the Academy snubbed him, and I'm like, of that ensemble, the three leads are so good, but it's like he really anchors that last act. And I think that last act, despite it kind of going off the rails at times in terms of like adding a bunch of just different stuff at the end that is hard to keep track of, I do think ultimately he sells it because of his performance. Like, I love when he hops into the carriage with them and he's like, oh, a picnic for all of us. And he's like kind of just sitting there, like kind of tormenting them and taunting them. He has just such a gravitas in everything he does. His voice is iconic. And I believe when we did All About Eve, Chad got to rep him. So I'm going to try to rep him here because I think he deserves to be in our Picture This Hall of Fame. I'm going to check now to make sure he's in there. If not, he's in there now. But I am a big fan of his. He's someone that I've discovered through this show, through Picture This. So I'm just excited every time we get to see him. Chad gave him the award for All About Eve. I'm looking now. So he's now made it into Hall of Fame, deservedly so. I think he's just such a charismatic actor, and he plays supporting roles so well because he's very rarely the front and center lead, but he really does know how to like elevate every scene he's in. So he's gonna be my pick if Charlie was off the board, but I'm not mad Chad got Charlie because it is the right pick. I would have been pissed if he didn't go one overall, even though it is my favorite film of the slate. I wish I could have repped him, but it's okay. Any thoughts on George Sanders before we move to Kerri?
It's
Love 'em.
really good performance. Yeah.
I'm just wondering which I think Philadelphia Story actor she's gonna pick.
Yeah, well, Kerri, you do have a difficult task right now. What is going to be your pick for Best Actor?
I am going to agree with the Academy and pick James Stewart.
Nice.
Um, yeah, he like you said, Dylan, he has a little bit more screen time in the Philadelphia Story, and he is just so incredibly charming in the movie, and I think he just gets to do more. Like he gets to have like I think a much fuller range than I mean I was between him and Cary Grant. Um, he gets to have a fuller range, I think, than Cary Grant, and he gets to be funny, and I just completely and totally enjoy watching him on screen.
Nice. Yeah, it's a great pick. I think of all the actors there, I would have also gone James Stewart, even though I think I like other performances of his better. I think in that movie he is the standout for all the men there. But yeah, Chad.
And the fact that James Stewart in the Philadelphia Story a year later sings "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" as he's carrying Tracy Lord
Yeah.
is really fun too.
Yeah, there you
Yeah.
go. Perfect. I love that. So James Stewart, Charlie Chaplin, George Sanders. We actually now go back to you, Kerri, because you're gonna have the first pick for Best Actress. You wanted to go first for that category. So what is gonna be your pick for Best Actor, or who is gonna be your pick for Best Actress?
This is actually harder than I thought it would be, which is awesome because a lot of times because I watch a lot of the Picture This movies with Chad, and we talk about who he's gonna pick for Best Actress. In some years, there are so few female performances that it is like kind of difficult to choose from, or like difficult to identify someone as like a standout,
Right.
especially when a lot of the movies like there's some years when almost all the movies the women are just like in really supporting roles, and this is a slate with like I mean most of these movies, I think all of them except for the Long Voyage Home is maybe the only exception, all of these movies have like fantastic female characters,
Yeah.
um, who are at least they're interesting, they're doing something, the acting is fantastic. Um, but I am still gonna go with my favorite, and that is Katharine Hepburn. I think she is just so incredibly witty and charming, and just at the she's always fantastic. This is my favorite role that she's in though, and she's in a ton of phenomenal roles. But this is my favorite performance of hers. So
Yeah, it's a great one. If you didn't pick it, I would have because it is just an all timer. It's shocking that she's won the most Academy Awards of any actor, and this is not one of them. Just goes to show how good she is in general. I mean, she got nominated for it, but she is exceptional. She really grounds the film where there's so many great performances around her. She really keeps it grounded. Chad, any thoughts on Katharine Hepburn?
Yeah, as I said, I just love hearing her talk in the movie, and just just the accent that she has, where she goes terribly. I just like love her accent.
Yeah, I was gonna try to look at how many times we've awarded her, but the phone screen's only too small, and my eyes are caked in silver makeup. So I'll tell you all next week or next month. But I am next up for actress. I get the middle pick for both of these, and I think you picking Katharine Hepburn made it easy for me to pick my backup, which is Joan Fontaine in Rebecca. I just think it's like the reasonable runner up, even though neither of them won the actress. I think Katharine Hepburn and Joan Fontaine are the central pieces that make those movies work, and those tend have been two of our three best films on these lists, when combining our averages. So I think it needed to be represented. I wouldn't have picked George Sanders if Joan Fontaine was also not going to get represented, because she is the movie for me. And she just brings so much just great nuance, but also such great fear and unknowing. You feel like you can see the movie through her because she has this sense of fear throughout it as well. And she's a rootable protagonist. It's not like one of those Hitchcock women who doesn't have as much agency, because sometimes that could be the case. And sometimes you have women who are either vilified or just used as like sex objects, or just like kind of to further the man's story. This one, I feel like she has her own arc, her own journey, which is a character thing, not a performance thing, but she adds a lot to that character by her performance. So I love it. I think Joan Fontaine is probably my favorite. It's her, Katharine Hepburn, but I'm happy they're both taken, so that's good. Any thoughts on Joan Fontaine?
Yeah, I mean, I think she's fantastic. And Rebecca, she just brings so much to that role. And she makes it very believable that, like, she's obviously this extremely beautiful woman, but her acting helps convince you that she would have these insecurities about class and about living up to the standard of Rebecca.
Yeah, absolutely. Chad?
Yeah, I mean, she's like a nameless character, but she brings so much personality to it. Whereas like if I got a role and it's like, you know, man number one, and then I bring like so much personality to man number one, and make it like a full character. I think it's like such a testament to performance. But like she also like makes you feel like the, epicness of the house and stuff like that, and you're really
Yeah.
like in the journey with her of discovery about like this house and Rebecca and what happened to her and all this stuff, and her trying to live up to her shadow and things like that. So yeah, it's truly great performance. And I had Katharine Hepburn, uh Joan Fontaine, and then the one that I picked, all trying to figure out which one I wanted to pick. So
Well, now it makes it easy because two of them
yeah.
have been taken. So who are you gonna pick?
Yep, you guys narrowed it down. I'm gonna pick Ginger Rogers for
There
Kitty
you
Foyle.
go.
Um,
Nice.
she was actually like the number one that I wrote down, and then I was sitting there toying with it because at one point Carrie was like, "Are you gonna pick Ginger Rogers if I pick Katharine Hepburn?" And I was like, "Probably." And then she was like, "I just want to see Ginger Rogers get represented," and I was like, "Okay," because she was the one that I wrote down because at one point Kitty Foyle was my number one, and I was like, "What if Kitty Foyle ends up being my number one?" And it was very close to being because I just loved that whole, journey that she goes on and the choices that she has to make, and just that like deep sadness that she feels, when she loses her kid, because she's like sitting there talking about all the hope she has for this young child, and then the child is never born, and then the deep sadness, and she has to move on with her life, and just how she plays out that like relationship with her father, and then the different men, and just struggling with all these decisions. I just thought she like crushed it. And then I don't even know if I've ever seen one of her musical movies. So
Oh,
exactly, so that's why
yeah.
like this is my introduction to Ginger Rogers.
Nice.
And so you know just knowing that she has a whole other like life or career
Yeah.
in musical theater and stuff like that is just like so fascinating, like that I love this performance where she's not doing any of that.
Yeah. She's one of those people that like when you watch back her like musical movies, you'll be like, "Oh, I have seen this. You just didn't know the context of it." She's like just one of those people that transcends in a way that like a lot of those Singing in the Rain, like Good Morning, they're like, "Oh, that's from Singing in the Rain." It's like, "Yeah, yeah," but it's one of those things where she's kind of like broke through in that way, and I agree, like it's cool to see her do something different. So yeah, I can't wait to recommend some Ginger Rogers, at least some clips for you, because she is just insane, one of the best dancers ever. Her and Fred Astaire, their duo was one of the best ever. So yeah, there you go. Any thoughts on Ginger Rogers, Carrie, before we rattle off the wins?
Yeah, like Chad said, I was debating picking her at one point. So I thought I think she made that movie. Like it would it would not be have been nearly as high up on my list without I think with someone else in that role.
There you go. Well, we've done it. We've done 1940, turn of the century. Let me recap real quickly. 1940, our best actors. My best actor, George Sanders for Rebecca. Chad's is Charles Chaplin for Great Dictator. Carrie's is James Stewart for Philadelphia Story. My best actress is Joan Fontaine for Rebecca. Chad's is Ginger Rogers for Kitty Foyle. Carrie's is Katharine Hepburn for the Philadelphia Story. And our best picture, as decided by our average, is Rebecca, Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca. There we go. Probably not the last Hitchcock film we'll talk about on Picture This, but definitely the last Best Picture winning Hitchcock, the only Best Picture winning Hitchcock film. So we're representing that there here on Picture This. He's made it into the Hall of Fame. There we go. So before we say goodbye and do our wrap up on this slate, I do have to tease the next slate, Chad. And because you know his last name, I will let you introduce who our guest is going to be next month. But I will tell you the year we are going to be covering is 1962. That's right. We're almost done with the year of classics, but we are going to be continuing on with a year that our guest picked because it is a monumental one. It has two of arguably the greatest classic films ever made. So, and maybe some surprises that we will determine as the best films ever made. But Chad, who is our guest?
Yeah, our guest is actually one of my good friends. Actually, a friend I met through Kerri from her college. It's my buddy Charles Mullen. Yeah, you didn't know that, Kerri?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we worked it out with Charles to come on here. Charles has never been on the Dill Pickle Movie Network, but he has been on my channel, Cinema Chad, with Kerri and Dylan, where we've ranked stuff on You Ranking With Me, the show that I do where we rank stuff. And we always love having Charles on that show because Charles just like when he watches movies, he like takes really good notes and he's just always like really there with his, thoughts. And, we're just like, he would make a great fit to be a guest on Picture This. So
Yeah, the first time I met Charles was in our Star Wars ranking, and I remember afterwards I was like, "Who's this Charles guy? Like, is he one of Dan's critic friends? Like, is he is he a local Maryland critic?" And you're like, "No, he's just one of my buddies." I'm like, "Wow!" Like he talks like he knows and discusses film as like a living. And I don't know if that's what he actually
yeah.
does for a living, but he does actually. He is a perfect fit for this show, especially. And I'm very excited. I got to meet Charles when we all went to see Illinois on Broadway, so it's nice that I can call him a friend too. But he's a very good friend of these two, and I'm very glad he's going to be part of this Picture This family.
Well, also the cool perspective that he's going to bring to this, especially with To Kill a Mockingbird, is that he's an English teacher. So
Yep.
he's a teacher, but he was like an English major. So it's
Perfect.
kind of like Kerri with talking about The Verdict. So
yeah. So Chad did tip off one of our five, but the 5 films we will be covering next month. Those films are the Best Picture winning Lawrence of Arabia. We also have The Longest Day, The Music Man, Mutiny on the Bounty, and as Chad mentioned, To Kill a Mockingbird. There we go. And at the time of recording, we have officially made it to October 31st. Happy Halloween, everyone. We recorded this at like 9-ish o'clock, so it is now midnight. It is Halloween, unless you're on Central Time, sorry. But you're getting this video on Halloween. We thank you all for watching this episode. Any last thoughts and where to find you? I'll start with Kerri. Amazing guests we have every time you come on. It's always great discussion. You talking about The Verdict is still one of my favorite Picture This memories ever. But just having you talk about these films, especially so many great films led by great women as well. It was just such a great conversation. And thank you for also making the time on spooky season schedule to fit 10 films in. Some of them are very long. Very, very appreciative and honored that you guys did this, but especially as a guest. You didn't have to, and you did, and we appreciate it. But where can they find you? Any last thoughts?
You can find me at Welcome to Primetime, which is the YouTube channel I do with Chad and our friend Hunter, and we cover horror movies and all things horror. And thank you for having me. This was so much fun, and it's always really, it's so great to, I don't know, like talk with you guys about these movies. 'Cause a lot of times I do get to watch them with Chad, and it's cool to kind of like be a part of the show a little bit sometimes, especially this slate. Like I didn't realize when I picked it just like how many great movies and great performances are in here.
Yeah, so absolutely. Yeah, and give a nice Halloween hug to our little sleeping lion, the fourth of our quartet here down the Yellow Brick Road. And Chad, where can they find you?
Check us out. Welcome to Primetime. We're in the middle of doing our 61 days of Primetime, and today, we will have had our live show that we were doing where we talk about Hocus Pocus and Halloween, like two of the staples of Halloween.
I watched Hocus Pocus last night. I'm watching Halloween today. I love that.
Perfect. And then check out the other videos where we go through like 60 films. It's been a lot of fun. Also, as I mentioned, check out Cinema Chad, where we do You Ranking With Me. We rank a bunch of things and just have a lot of fun over there. No, I'm just here. That's about it.
Nice. And you can find me at Dylan_Randazzo at Twitter and or Letterboxd. My YouTube channel, if you're listening, Dill Pickle Movie Network. If you're on YouTube, check out the Dill Pickle Podcast. And of course, I did link it now finally on the bottom border, Cinema Chad. I did put it on our border, so now it's there to stay. That's where you can find Chad as well. I was going to plug something else. Oh, yeah. Halloween. I know it's happening today, but this weekend for Marvelous Movie Mondays on Monday, Kelsey and I are doing our 31 Days of Halloween wrap up. So I will be giving you my thoughts on my 5 favorite new watches. Some may surprise you. Some movies that people hate might be some of my favorites. We'll see. But I've been doing daily TikToks, also doing those. I've recorded them all except for Halloween, which I'm going to be recording today. But I've recorded them all. I just need to get about editing them, and some of them may be edited and released a little later than Halloween, but they're all filmed and ready to go. And you'll be able to hear reviews on my Letterboxd. But thank you guys so much for watching. Any last thoughts before I call it a night on 1940? Cool. All right. Well, there you go, people. Happy Halloween. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy trick-or-treating. You'll probably get this around the middle afternoon, so the sun should be setting by the time this episode's over, so you go out, have a fun time. And yes, Chad got a brain. And Kerri's at home, which means I got to go find a freaking heart. Just kidding. My heart is right here. It's these people. It's all the people watching. It's all the people who've tuned in and made my very hectic October between film festivals and being on the press for film festivals and in attendance as an actor in a film festival and watching these movies and Halloween watching. It's been a crazy month, and I've thought very hard about like just ditching a project and being like, you know what, no more spooky season watching. But because of this community and because of all of you and these great guests and just other great hosts on the channel, I've been able to somehow power through it. And it's now October 31st. I watched all I needed to watch, and I'm ready to rest in November. So thank you guys so much for watching this one, and we'll see you next time for 1962 with Charles for the Year of Classics on Picture This. Thanks for watching, guys.